Chapter 530 Bellows. Unbeknown to the celestial world, within the myriad dreams shroud, an unprecedented battle played out. Each Dragon Duke summoned 30 Thonian Lord from their respective secret forces to split the 300 Titans into 12 groups, not only mitigating their numbers, but preventing the maximum use of battle formations. The Titans Battalion originally comprised 140 early-stage legendary Titan gods, 100 at the mid-stage, 47 at the late stage, and 13 at the peak. Following the division, each platoon on average comprised 12 early-stage legendary Titan gods, 8 at the mid-stage, 4 at the late stage, and 1 at the peak. Of those 12 Titan platoons, the Titan Lords was undoubtedly the mightiest, for although they possessed the same cultivation level, those other peak-stage legendary Titan gods were not his match. On the Myriad Dreams Valley side, the Thonian Dragon Dukes each boasted a peak-stage Grand Devil cultivation base, equal to mid-stage legendary gods, while the 360 Thonian Lords they'd summoned each stood at the late stage of the Grand Devil realm, merely equal to the peak of the ancestral god rank. Although they won in manpower, cultivation-wise, the Titans didn't doubt that they weren't their match. And at first, the Titan Lord even wondered why those foreign helpers so desperately wanted them to source out those Thonian forces. His thoughts soon underwent a 180-degree turn. In terms of bloodline strength, although the gathered Titans were the cream of the crop, they fell a step short to even those Thonian Lords. As for the Dragon Dukes, they were in a whole other league. Even the Demon and Deva Primogen's bloods couldn't compare. Worse, their cultivation methods and innate skills turned out to be mind-boggling headaches. Devils were not merely cultivators, but the demons in all hearts. As long as rage, bloodlust, or any kind of nefarious or depraved emotions existed in their opponents' hearts, they possessed an innate advantage. Better, as they battle prolonged, they would only grow stronger. But that merely was the tip of the iceberg. If being shackled by an outwardly weaker but inwardly unfathomable enemy was frustrating enough, when a Titan god's fist squashed a Thonian Lord's head and soul, the Titans soon came to another horrid realization. Tarnation, they can't be killed. The Titan Lord stammered while similar words echoed from his subordinates' minds. It was common knowledge that the destruction of the soul was the end of even deities. However, those Thonian beings could instantly remold even their souls. How could they die? And indeed, they were right. Without at least primal law embodiment, Thonian Lords couldn't be killed. On the field, there wasn't one entity able to slay those key members of Conrad's immortal forces. The same didn't apply in reverse. Innate skill. Auspicious clouds. The Dragon Dukes proclaimed in tandem, filling the area with a surge of kaleidoscope clouds. Instantly, the Titans felt their strength drop. Although the Dragon Duke's auspicious clouds weren't enough to invalidate their laws and strength, they still experienced an overall reduction of battle power. Cashing on that, the Thonian Lords made their counterattack, first targeting the weak links of the Titan platoons and eliminating all early-stage legendary gods in a lightning assault. One Titan god used nature laws to raise dozens of earthen barriers, from raw rock walls to intricate vine wall formations. Little did he expect the 3 Thonian Lords targeting him to turn into ravenous ghosts, bypass the walls, and devour him body and soul. Another had not even raised his defenses that 3 Thonian Lords' blades sliced his legs, waist, and neck. Similar situations played out all around. Meanwhile, the peak-stage legendary Titan gods were startled to see themselves isolated in unique dimensions by the Dragon Duke's auspicious clouds. Although overshadowed by its law and cultivation-suppressing abilities, Auspicious Cloud's domain separation and isolation was by itself a formidable skill, enabling the user to trap their foe in a lesser domain where even realm wills didn't have access. In those domains, the dragon's strength and mobility increased while the foe's decreased at the same rate. Although to the onlooker's eyes, the Titans remained on the same scene, in truth, their leaders all lay in separate mini-realms. Now, Viserin, the Titan Lord, was finally starting to feel fright creep on his gargantuan body. To him, dying in battle was glorious and his personal life and death of little consequence. However, although in the Titan domain they still kept 400 elders in reserve, Should all 300 of perish here, their world's newly built foundation was bound to experience horrendous damage. Where the hell are they? The Titan Lord cursed while raising his eyes toward the sky. Alas, the myriad dreams mist prevented him from looking beyond. But as the Titan Lord sought his reinforcements, a jet-black claw wrapped with terrible death laws tore through the air as it hurtled at him. Recoiling, the Titan Lord stretched out his 18 arms, clenched his fists, and threw 18 simultaneous punches at the dragon's death claw. From those punches, war, truth, and fate laws erupted alongside the full might of his bloodline strength. Bang! One rigging blast thundered as the Titan Lord's punches clashed with the death claw. From that claw, black and icy blue light soared, entangling the Titan Lord's laws in a vicious clash. Bang! Another blast, and the Titan Lord recoiled on 5 steps while suppressing slight internal damage. His eyes widened in disbelief. Death, embodiment? He realized with great dismay. And indeed, not just that dragon, all Thonian dragon dukes had reached death embodiment, standing only a step away from transcendence. Although the Titan Lord had reached wielding in truth, fate, and embodiment in war, he wasn't up to the challenge. The Thonian dragon spread his gargantuan wings while his maws expanded in what looked like a scornful grimace. To think that in the past, I so deeply revered the Titan blood. What a pity that your bloodline strength remains the same, while ours keeps rising alongside our sovereigns. The future of the human race can indeed only rely on his majesty. Birkin sneered, speaking words the Titan Lord found quite stifling while 3 dark purple devil rings appeared at his back. From the shanks, lightning bolts stretched out, merging in the center to form gargantuan devil tridents. With that move, Birkin clearly planned to bring the battle to a swift conclusion. His fellow dukes thought the same. But as the Thonian forces prepared to end the invasion, from the misty clouded sky, a figure dropped, stopping in the clouded air, amidst waves of deadly moves without neither care nor fear. That figure, a white-robed, golden-haired man, lowered his golden eyes onto the Thonian forces, sweeping them all with non-existent intensity. Or so it appeared at first. Right afterward, dreadful crimson sunlight erupted from his eyes, stopping the Thonian lords in their Titan slaughtering and alerting both dragon dukes and surviving Titans. But as confusion flashed in the Thonian dragon's icy eyes, in the Titan's elation flared. "Your Excellency, thank you for your assistance," the Titan Lord exclaimed while the golden-haired man crossed his hands beneath his back and gave a simple nod of approval. His cultivation base then erupted, alarming all the Thonian forces on the scene with its dreadful pressure. Half-step over God, truth embodiment, Birkin, Wolfgang, and the other dukes realized as the man's cultivation oppressed them all. But the effect of his strength paled when compared to his facial features and unique bloodline signature, which both perfectly that of someone they knew very well. "Profane Prince, you have 3 seconds to come out before I start slaughtering your subordinates." The man, whose bloodline strength mixed Ravmalak and Archdemon lineages, stated with a disturbing calm. The Profane Prince didn't appear. Instead, 3 light beams streaked from the myriad Dreams Valley to land before that man, revealing Verena, Selene, and the Valkyrie. With Verena having already warned them of the man's arrival, no surprise flashed on Selene or the Valkyrie's face. On Selene's, however, a tinge of sorrow lingered, and as her now icy eyes met the man's, a flurry of emotions shone within. "Brother, long time no see," Selene greeted Bellows, her twin brother. Chapter 531, Immemorial Titans. It appeared Bellows' ears stood deaf to his sister's words. A cold silence followed, a silence during which Bellows eyed Selene from head to toe, lingering on her icy blue eyes and the glaring change in the bloodline signature she should have possessed. "Ungrateful wretch," Bellows stated and raised his right hand, causing 9 crimson suns to appear at his back as he summoned his ancestral glory. Though his gaze remained locked on Selene's, no warmth lay in his eyes. Instead, it was the suppressed glint of a battle frenzy that hid beneath the composed exterior. "Feed a dog, and he will guard your door." When even beasts know to repay kindness, you betray your benefactor and side with the enemy, yet have the nerve to call me brother. No, you're not qualified. Bellows replied, tilting his head to the left while still maintaining eye contact. If the word stung, Celine showed no sign of it. Better, her lips curled into a smirk. The so-called benefactor only needed cheap batteries. We've repaid what we owed by doing our assigned duties. Since it was merely a relationship of mutual use, why call it betrayal? I find that slightly excessive. Celine retorted, undisturbed by Bellows' oral inquisition. I am a simple-minded person. Help those you like. Harm those you dislike has always been my motto. Regretless, I dislike. Conrad, I like. It is that simple. Celine pursued. But when the name Regretless left her lips, Bellows' eyes widened with a feral surge of fury. Bold creature, how dare you speak the given name of His Excellency? At first, for the sake of our blood ties and grandfather's heart, I considered giving you one last chance. But since you're so dead set on offending those you ought to serve, there is no need for leniency. Bellows snarled, and with every word, his outward composure collapsed, making way for a full-blown battle lust. Maddened frenzy filled his eyes, with the golden hues and scara turning into crimson flames, while the 9 suns at his back blazed with a blinding, crushing light. Seeing this, Verena was forced to admit that the strength of a half-step over god was indeed staggering. Although it only was half a level more, the gap was as vast as the difference between an early stage and a peak stage legendary god. Moreover, unlike the past Overlord and Warden, Bellows was the real deal, backed by not only a formidable bloodline, but truth embodiment and wielding in other primal laws. If he'd appeared a month before, Verena wouldn't have had any confidence in handling him. Now, however, it was a whole other story. Celine, Verena, and the Valkyrie unleashed their cultivation bases, releasing devil force that now stood at the early stage of the prime devil realm. Although in pure cultivation level, they were only equal to peak stage legendary gods, the overpowered devil road ensured Bellows was bound to suffer miseries. Stretching out his hands, Bellows summoned Fell Judgment, his lineage weapon, and turned into 10,000 afterimages as he shot toward the 3. Or so the onlookers initially thought. The 3 consorts, however, could see that those were no mere afterimages, but perfect replicas created by truth laws. Every time Bellows landed in a spot in space, a truth mirror would anchor that present to produce a truth clone. Though time embodiments could use a similar trick, theirs was hundreds of times weaker. But since Bellows could do it, how could the ladies not? Celine's form blurred, and she too produced 10,000 identical versions as she shot toward Bellows, summoning her glaive which now possessed an icy hue. In a collision of sweeping glaives, the 2 truth armies clashed against one another. Kaleidoscope light from the Law Revolution creed burst from Celine's form as she met her brother in a battle of glaives. However, as they exchanged hundreds of moves, his advantage became evident. Bellows' cultivation method and bloodline strength might be inferior to Celine's, but the horrendous gap of that half-step allowed it to more than make up for it, making her recoil with every swing, if only for a step. But as the clangs of their glaives echoed, the Valkyrie made her move. Truth, fate, life and death embodiment erupted from her form as she hurtled at Bellows. Bang! As the Bellows Truth Army clashed with Celine's, the Valkyrie's sword cleft the air, shredding all of Bellows' Truth clones in a single slash. Battered by the surge of devil force, he flew backward and somersaulted on several rounds before finally steadying himself. Interesting, Bellows muttered with a smirk. Clearly, he could see that the Valkyrie wasn't just one person, but an amalgam of thousands whose combined strength sufficed to overpower him. But even then, he didn't lose his composure. Celine and the Valkyrie turned into dark purple meteors as they streaked toward Bellows. But before their blades could reach him, his smirk became a fiendish grin. From the Titan domain, on mountain-sized fist descended, expanding across an impossible distance as it tumbled onto the battlefield. From that fist, a soul-rending force that completely transcended the legendary god sphere erupted. locking all where they stood as it crashed into Selene and the Valkyrie. An overgod's punch. Bang! Blasted by the punch, Selene and the Valkyrie flew backward with a massive eruption of blood. Their forms dropped from the sky, tumbling until they cratered down below and burst into a blood fog. But instantly, the blood fog gathered, reforming into their two, outwardly unharmed, but inwardly weakened form. Although primal law embodiments typically couldn't kill one another, inflicting pain and suffering didn't require much effort. Faced with the blow of an overgod, even they couldn't come out unscathed. Did you really think I came alone? Since our task is to force out the Chthonian Primogen, we naturally brought reliable manpower. Bellows sneered, and the gargantuan fists pulled back, replaced by 10 white-robed old men with the bindi-like Titan mark on their foreheads, or almost. Instead of the usual circular shape, theirs looked more like diamonds, red diamonds from which inconceivable power rippled. As those 10 men surrounded him, Bellows adopted a respectful stance and cupped his hands in greetings. Immemorial Titan elders, thank you for your assistance, Bellows said with a polite bow. No need to stand on ceremonies. Since Sakura entrusted you to us, we naturally won't let you fall into harm's way. The leader of those elders replied while sweeping the Valkyrie, Selene, and Verena with his oppressive glance. But though on the outside the three appeared riddled with fright, inwardly they felt no surprise. If within the three realms Titans were the apex of the human race, beyond, the situation was vastly different. In the primordial era of the 6 realms, the Empyrean dragons and other divine beasts populated the Empyrean realm. The nature spirits inhabited the nature realm, the Tao spirits for the Tao realm, the tribulation spirits for the tribulation realm, and the nether spirits for the nether realm. But as for the demonic realm, contrarily to what one might expect, it was inhabited by humans. The first denizens of the demonic realm were ordinary humans without any bloodline abilities. However, the terrible conditions of the demonic realm's various worlds ensured that the human race couldn't survive. In some, it was fire and brimstone. In others, unending storms, stifling deserts, and so on. Of the initial humans, trillions perished, but others evolved, survived, and thrived, creating new bloodlines to survive their worlds. Rejecting the traditional cultivation path, they took their bodies as their heaven and the world as their food, siphoning and bending it to their will to become known as demons. Flame demons, storm demons, beast demons, Titans, and many other bloodlines appeared, with some perishing and others rising to replace them. In the end, 3 bloodlines lorded over the demonic realm. The Titans were one of them. Those were the true demons. The demons of this era had nothing to do with those past entities. Rather, they were offshoots of the nether spirits. Following regretless worldwide purge, many bloodlines vanished while others rose further and enjoyed eternal glory. Evidently, the Titans stood within the lot. As for immemorial Titans, only those whose bloodline strength rivaled that of the primordial Titan race were qualified for that title, and in the current era, stood as the true summit of the human race. Cloud and Night were both immemorial Titans, and thanks to regretless graces, Sakura also joined their ranks. But though she knew the opponent's battle power stood in a completely different realm, Verena held no fear. Chapter 532 Heart Tribulations. While the immemorial Titans formed a frontier before Bellows, Selene and the Valkyrie stood up, and alongside Verena confronted their new foes. You are not our match. The Chthonian Primogen is the one we come for. As long as he comes out, we won't make things difficult for you. The leading immemorial Titan stated. With a mid-stage overgod cultivation base, his strength was more than enough to suppress all within the 3 realms. Of that truth, he had no doubt. As for that profane prince, in terms of pure strength, they didn't believe him to be their match. However, at the end of the day, he had the power of a realm at his disposal. That foundation was the true challenge. But even then, they had the means to complete their tasks. Alas, Verena never planned to give them the opportunity. From the myriad Dreams Valley's supporting mountain, vast devil force erupted, morphing into 9 dark purple vessels that streaked the air to surround the Titans. A defensive formation? The leader recognized without a hint of fear. But before he made another move, Verina's voice echoed. I've been wondering who was the one that dispatched you. It's undoubtedly not Bloodnether and isn't likely to be Moon, so is it Night or Cloud? Or perhaps you merely wish to revitalize distant kin while snatching some merit on the road? She inquired with an outward grimace of frustration. But hearing their superiors' given names being so casually uttered, the immemorial Titan's faces twisted into frowns. Though he maintained his composure, even the leader didn't take kindly to this glaring lack of respect. You really do not cherish your life. To dare utter the Omniarch's relatives' names in such a casual manner, do you think that the so-called Profane Prince is such a reliable tree? Laughable. The leading immemorial Titan scoffed and stretched his right hand toward the surrounding vessels. From within the Myriad Dreams Valley, Heidi and Cassilia, who'd long since emerged from seclusion, controlled the formation, directing the vessel's destructive power at the overgods. However, there is no harm in mentioning it. The firmament is so far away that even for us, crossing that distance requires weeks of non-stop traveling. If not for a superior's instructions, how could we condescend to make this tedious trip and invest those resources? Though you misunderstand, this is neither Lord Cloud nor Lord Night's will. It is Sakura's. The immemorial Titan replied, startling the Thonian forces. Selene more than the others. Although on the scene, all knew that Sakura was the given name of the past great primal ancestor, only Selene knew of his current condition. Or more accurately, of his condition before she started drifting amidst various worlds and hosts of the three realms. According to her calculations, her grandfather should just be breaking through to the early stage of the overgod rank. Although that strength would make him a mighty lord in any domain of the Omniverse, it clearly wasn't enough to order fellow overgods, much less overgods from the firmament. How did he do it? But unlike Selene, Verina didn't have that much considerations. The leader made his move, releasing a dazzling white ray that slammed the 9 vessels, sending them rolling in the air. From that ray, Titans and Thonian legionaries alike could feel an unstoppable force able to put them all on their knees. But at that time, the 9 vessels burst, releasing a horrendous storm of devil forces that destabilized the immemorial Titan's flawless mind state. Now, Verina's voice thundered, and instantly, Selene, the Valkyrie, and she vanished to form a triangle around the immemorial Titans. In sync, the 3 stretched their hands toward the overgods. Heart tribulation. They bellowed, causing squalls of dark purple lightning bolts to surge from their palms and barrel into the immemorial Titans. But those lightning bolts didn't target the flesh. Instead, they snuck past the overgods' defenses to assail their Tao heart. Instantly, the 10 overgods found themselves appearing in a world of infernal tribulations where lightning crackled and thunder grumbled in a sky of eternal darkness. Relentless storms blasted them left and right, and soon, they tumbled into the worlds of their worst nightmares, only getting a breath of respite when the tribulation lightning returned to hammer them. Aeaeowarg. 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 The 10 overgods' pupils bleached as they howled in a maddened frenzy, startling bellows and the surrounding Titans who couldn't understand why the outwardly unharmed elders now raved like lunatics. Checkmate, Verina stated in a victorious tone. Heart tribulation was an ability unlocked by prime devils, enabling them to unleash the most dreadful of tribulations on a cultivator's Tao heart. In a mild dose, it could serve as training. But when unrestrained, unless those afflicted could overcome it, they were doomed to drift through nightmares before finally suffering a collapse of their Tao hearts and souls. Naturally, Verina didn't plan to give them the time to reach that point. Following the initial plan, the Valkyrie charged Bellows with her long sword, sending him reeling with a frontal thrust. Bang! Though Bellows met the thrust with a downward slash of his glaive, the sheer energy within the blow sent him hurtling backward, and he crashed dozens of meters away. Ready to end the clash, the 3 consorts aimed at the trapped elders and clenched their fists. Heart collapse. Devil lightning burst from right within the overgods' hearts, threatening to obliterate them in heart and soul. But at that time, as night gave way to dawn, a mild voice echoed. Enough? The simple word carried alongside it irresistible truth laws that dropped from the sky, locking all in their motions. To say nothing of the rest, even Verena, the Valkyrie and Selene had no way to resist that force. It was as if time, no, the truth of that instant had been anchored in a painting of flesh and blood. A dazzling white ray descended, revealing the form of a white-robed, middle-aged man with jet-black hair and a diamond-like bindi on his forehead. Clearly, he was another immemorial titan. But beyond the tyrannical air of that lineage, waves of primordial energies undulated around him as if he was a primeval world, a heaven and earth of his own. A primordial god. The primordial god waved his hand, altering the truth of the events and causing the 10 over-gods to regain their senses. Subsequently freed of his control, all eyes rose to meet him. Truth transcendence. Verena and the Valkyrie realized in a stupor. But that merely was the beginning. Verena could see that beyond truth transcendence, that immemorial titan possessed something else. Fate transcendence. And if the alarming might all those implied nailed them on the ground, something else grabbed Selene's attention. The man's figure, a figure her eyes remained glued onto. And seeing him, Bellows dragged his wounded self from the ground and bowed as lowly as he could. "Greetings, grandfather," Bellows exclaimed, for indeed the man was his grandfather, former great primal ancestor. Sakura. This time, the immemorial titans showed none of their condescendence and bowed towards Sakura's floating form. "Your Excellency, congratulations on refining the firmament fruit and becoming the firmament's new primordial deity," they exclaimed in tandem. In the past, they might have been peers, but now that Sakura succeeded in the refining and rose to primordial deity, they would never again be equals. After all, unlike him, they didn't have the Omniarch's favor. But while his former peers' congratulations echoed, Sakura's eyes dropped on Selene's and stopped right there. Chapter 533 Booted. "Grandfather? How can this be?" Selene couldn't help but ask. To leap from the early stage of the over-god rank to the early stage of the primordial god rank was an inconceivable occurrence. Either her calculations were utterly wrong or Sakura experienced some unrivaled fortuitous encounter. How can it not be? The Omniarch greatly favors grandfather and granted him a firmament fruit. Initially, grandfather planned to wait until the peak of the overgod rank to refine it, but because of you troublemakers, he had to take it early. Bellows replied in Sakura's stead, but though Selene didn't know what firmament fruits were, the firmament in those words guaranteed their extraordinariness. Never did she know that her grandfather enjoyed such graces from Regretless. Firmament fruits were a rarity of the firmament tree, with new batches of 3 every 1,000,000 years. A cultivator could only take one in their life, but with that one, regardless of their bridge or level, their cultivation would rise by an entire rank. Even within the firmament, very few held the right to enjoy them. Typically, Regretless only bestowed them upon his close relatives and meritorious officials. To receive one ensured that in the future, Sakura would rank among Regretless' closest retainers. Because of such a distinction, even before he refined the fruit, those overgods were willing to be ordered by him. "Are you determined to persist on this road?" Sakura asked Selene in the gentle tone of a caring elder. "I am," Selene directly replied, not flinching for even a second. Sakura nodded in approval. "Very well. Irreconcilable grievances divide those we serve. Henceforth, we are enemies. But though we stand on different paths, I hope you can stay lucid and avoid a suicidal fight," Sakura declared. From beginning to end, he never mentioned Surya. Not because he didn't care to, but for he already knew all that was relevant. Sakura waved his large sleeve, releasing a mild force that split all on the scene in 2 rows, the Titans and Bellows at his left, the Chthonian forces at his right. Neither could make a move, and a clear path now lay between him and the Myriad Dreams Valley. Sakura stepped forward, vanished and reappeared above the Myriad Dreams Valley's outer court. With another step, he landed above the core zone, bypassing all the defenses and formations controlled by Heidi and Cassilia as if they never existed. Though I do not know where you precisely reside, it ought to be here. Some may call you Dragon Warden, Thonian Primogen, Jade Emperor, or Profane Prince, but I will still go with Conrad. So Conrad, open your ears and listen. I do not entertain manslaughter, but in times of war, even gentlemen must set aside such scruples. If in 5 seconds you don't come out, I shall wipe out the Myriad Dreams Valley. Sakra pledged and raised his right hand. 1, 2, the countdown began. On the scene, the Titan side didn't doubt that the Myriad Dreams Valley had reached the end of its destiny. After all, if that profane prince had any measure of intellect, he wouldn't dare show up, and instead use that devil bridge of his to remain hiding for the next trillion years. On the Thonian forces' side, however, not a hint of dread lingered. 3, 4, 5. The count reached its end, and Sakra made his move. Innate skill, sovereign authority, Sakra uttered as he clenched his right hand, releasing that same skill that allowed the Titan Lord to decide the life and death of the Sea Dream domain. However, in Sakra's hands, the berserk force was so vast that even overgods couldn't remain standing. Across tens of thousands of kilometers, all became the vassals of his tyrannical will, awaiting the judgment he readied to pass. Within the Sea Dream Temple, Rithi's face contorted into a frown. She might not care about the lives of those ants, but Conrad did. If she still kept her hands crossed at this juncture, in the future, what hope was there to regain his care? Moreover, she didn't doubt that the current Conrad wasn't Sakra's match. Without more hesitation, Rithi lifted her hand, stretching it toward Sakra as he unleashed the formless wrath of death on the Myriad Dreams Valley. But as she readied to make her move, a shocking scene occurred, stopping not only she but Sakra in their gestures. The wind blew in reverse. Not everyone could feel that wind. On the scene, only Verena, Sakra, and Rithi were qualified to sense it, but all that did felt their eyes widen. Rithi and Sakra from disbelief, Verena from joy. Heaven's destiny has been robbed, Rithi and Sakra realized in a stupor. The destiny was half the will. If heaven's destiny had indeed been robbed, half of its will had already changed hands. Their eyes locked on the spot where the winds gathered, a secluded hall of the Myriad Dreams Valley from which the acme of death, fate, and life laws billowed. In a deafening blast, 3 energy columns rose to the sky. An emerald, black, and translucent column stood, rippling with those transcendental life, death, and truth laws. Bang! Another blast, and the columns dispersed, revealing a 1.9 meters tall man whose wind-blown, snow-white hair fluttered with Empyrean grace. At his right, a pitch-black cauldron stood, and at his left, a ring of marble-white pills. He opened his mouth, letting one of those pills dive into it, vanishing into his body in waves of surging force. In that instant, dazzling light erupted from the man's form, blinding all on the scene with the purest of heavenly luminescence and giving him the grace of an archangel. But an angel he was not. No, his icy blue eyes would forever remind the world that beneath that celestial radiance lay the monarch of depravity, the sovereign of all devils, the profane prince, Conrad. And as the heavenly luminescence dazzled the world, his cultivation rose from the early stage of the prime devil realm straight to the peak. The luminescence dispersed, but as it did, Sakra was startled to see Conrad's form escape his eyesight. A foot trampled his head, sending him hurtling in the sky before cratering in the ground deep below the Myriad Dreams Valley's mountain. Destroy my sect? Just you? Boy, know your place. Chapter 534, Shifting Void Step. Meanwhile, within the heaven-warding temple, following Sakra's arrival, Night and Blood Nether's eyes peered into the confrontation. Alas, as soon as Conrad appeared, they could no longer sense anything. He's finally out. Blood Nether beamed and stood up, ready to assail the Myriad Dreams Valley. But she'd not taken a step that Night's voice echoed. Where are you going? Did you forget your contract? He reminded as he sat cross-legged in meditation. The words stopped Blood Nether in her tracks, and she spun to confront him. We still have half a month before the deadline is reached. Nothing in the contract prevents me from attacking him in that period. To be frank, the only reason why I agreed was to free myself from him. I never planned to wait until then. Bloodnether replied, but hearing those words, Knight shook his head. And you think he doesn't know that? You think he gave you your freedom back so that you could chase him throughout heaven? Sister-in-law, be more lucid. If he doesn't want to be caught, you can never grab him. If he lets you charge, you're courting a disaster. Knight chided in a cool, inexpressive tone that only heightened Bloodnether's ire. However, she restrained herself, pulling in a deep breath to control the flames of wrath swelling her heart. True, the contract ensures that once defeated he cannot escape. But what if he wins? In pure strength, I do not fear him. I refuse to believe that in a measly 2 months or time he can catch up to me. But the bastard possesses 10,000 tricks. What if he cheats his way into victory? I can't give him the Oportu. Bloodnether began. But before she could finish her words, again Knight shook his head. You don't believe it, but I do. Transcendence and nascent infiniteness insight in less than 70 years. Throughout the Omniverse, where have you seen that? Each transcendence is thousands of times more challenging than the previous one, but he achieved triple transcendence in less than 300 years. Throughout the Omniverse, where have you seen that? Add to that a quasi-firmament bloodline, a firmament bridge, and a forbidden physique of who knows what level, and I'm sorry to say that in the upcoming battle, your odds are not favorable. Though cut mid-talk, Bloodnether was forced to agree that the words were more than reasonable. Her loathing of Conrad might have blinded her to the dreadful of his performance, but the fact of the matter was that even Regretless didn't have such a track record. I don't understand. The more reason we shouldn't wait for his arrival. Don't forget, my soul is at stake. She snarled in frustration, and this time, Knight opened his eyes, staring into her crimson hues with his oppressing, jet-black eyes. What does it matter if his soul belongs to me? We will use the contract to lure him here and set up an impregnable formation with our laws and primordial force as the front and my nothingness insight as the back. If he loses, the case is closed. If he wins, I will activate the formation to forever seal him in nothingness. Knight assured, causing Bloodnether's eyes to narrow. Did you take another step? Have you forgotten Regretless warnings? She inquired in a tone laced with worry. Of their house, only Knight cultivated nothingness. Even Regretless didn't step on that road. In the past, Knight rapidly reached nascent nothingness insight, showing a talent in the craft that alarmed Regretless. And for good reasons. Of all other paths to supremacy, nothingness was the only one that required personal sacrifices. With nascent insight alone, Knight lost a good margin of his emotional spectrum. Therefore, Regretless forbade him to carry on, and he didn't. However, the times had changed. The situation called for desperate measures. If I didn't take that step, I couldn't free myself from Dragon Warden's curse. Don't worry, although with profound insight I've lost about everything, I still have the most important thing left. Nothing else matters. Knight replied, and by most important thing, he naturally referred to familial love. And hearing this, Bloodnether sighed. For an instant, even her feud with Conrad became irrelevant. But then it occurred to her that if not for Conrad, Knight wouldn't have had to take that step. Worse, perhaps Regretless would be forced to do the same. In a flash, her hatred returned, galvanized by might waves that called for Conrad's head. Meanwhile, within the Myriad Dreams Valley, tension stifled the atmosphere as even the overgods watched in awe the figure of the one they previously so casually dismissed. Trampling a primordial god, throughout the Omniverse, how many could achieve that feat? It didn't take 2 hands to count them all. The earth grumbled as from the debris, Sakra's figure rose, coursing the still billowing dust to stand before Conrad. But unlike what the rational might expect, he faced him with a smile. What a startling growth speed. Some say that His Excellency is the greatest talent of all eras, but I am afraid that crown has already shifted head. What a pity. Sakra began while the acme of truth and fate laws burst from his form. This time, Rathi didn't plan to intervene. For some reason, As she stared at Conrad, she held the supreme confidence that today, the only ones to suffer would be his foes. A pity that talent is only half the equation. The Omniarch is invincible. The past, the present, and future will never have his match. You are like an egg trying to squash a rock, attempting the impossible. For the sake of our karma, before His Excellency returns, I will spare you from damnation by again sending you into reincarnation. Sakura bellowed and stepped forward. With that step, it was as if he became one with the celestial world, one with the vast heaven, visible yet invisible, tangible yet intangible. The onlookers suddenly had a misconception that Sakura stood within the essence of the void, able to simultaneously appear at all spots within space and attack from millions of angles. Seeing this, Conrad's eyes widened in disbelief. The shifting void step, he realized in bewilderment, and instantly, his face contorted into a frown. In the last age of the primordial era, although it wasn't an ancient secret, the shifting void step was renowned as the #1 movement skill of all times. A dreadful skill that enabled its users to imitate movement abilities unique to nothingness users. However, only 2 people cultivated it. Its creator, the Empyrean Dragon Clan's Great Elder, Highest Dragon. His nephew, disciple, and successor, Regretless. This movement skill was the brand of Highest Dragon's Dao lineage, a peerless technique he only passed down to Regretless. In the past, Regretless cherished those mnemonics more than his life and wouldn't share them with anyone, Dragon Warden and his sworn siblings included. Even following the Empyrean's destruction and his takeover of the firmament, he didn't pass it down. Why would he teach it to Sakura? Within the Sea Dream Temple, Rithi's eyes also widened in incomparable disbelief. But unaware of the commotion that movement skill caused within them, Sakura made his move. Dao Law, myriad of collapsing stars. Dao Law, myriad of collapsing stars. Dao Law, myriad of collapsing stars. The words thundered from every corner of space, and Sakura vanished, replaced by billions of dazzling, boulder-sized white stars that turned into meteors as they assailed Conrad from all sides. Chapter 535 Brutal Retaliation. In the split of a second, the celestial sky's dawn turned into a starry painting with billions of mesmerizing meteors shooting toward a single adversary. In those meteors, the acme of truth, fate, and sun laws rippled. Each was more than enough to obliterate the 3 realms, but when all joined for a single target, even non-transcendent, early-stage primordial gods would fear for their lives. Conrad didn't. His eyes never swept those meteors, ignoring them entirely as he pondered Sakura's identity. The armada of meteors approached ever closer, but in contrast, Conrad's lips curled into a smile. Send me into reincarnation? How conceited. But to say nothing of you, even if the old fogey returned to life, he could only grovel. Conrad replied, but instead of making his move, placed his hands on either side of his hips while lifting up his chin in a derisive smile. The meteors now only stood tens of centimeters away from him, able to nuke him in the next instant. But shockingly, though they kept getting closer, they could never graze his fluttering imperial robe. How can this be? Sakura wondered while the billions of meteors kept soaring toward Conrad, yet never got closer to the goal. It was as if space ever expanded, preventing them from reaching him regardless of the distance they covered. Infinite space expansion? He reached profound infiniteness insight? Already? Rithi realized from within the Sea Dream Temple, and indeed, this was an application of infiniteness insight, the ever-expansion of space. In the past, only Regretless possessed that skill, and though his understanding of the supreme principles was shallow, Sakura soon understood what he was dealing with. But so what? Conrad tilted his head to the left, and while the space surrounding Sakura's meteor shower still expanded, the space around him shrank, compressing until 6 black holes formed around him. The space surrounding Sakura's meteors stopped its expansion, and they all dived into the black holes, sucked in by irresistible suction force. Sakura desperately attempted to free himself from the meteor fusion, but it was far too late. Unable to resist, He fell alongside his stellar armada and was shredded into pieces, pulled apart by a compression point. But having transcended in truth and fate, that alone couldn't end him, and in a twister of white and translucent haze, he rematerialized. Still, his bleached skin and trickling sweat testified to the internal wounds he currently suffered. Is this profound infiniteness insight? Sakura stammered the words while gasping for breath. Meanwhile, the previously confident Titan side stared slack-jawed at the confrontation, with pure dread filling their eyes. Some even felt their knees weaken and their feet grow sore, as if smashed by the sensation of kicking an iron bar. Just a minor trick, nothing worth mentioning, Conrad replied, and he jested not. Although infinite space compression and expansion was unique to infiniteness insight, the creation of black holes was something even nothingness users could accomplish. It was by no means a trademark of that supreme principle. Cocking his head back, Conrad glanced at the now trembling Titans, and as they wondered what devil prompted them to descend into this chaotic land, they were startled to see, or rather feel, a boundless suction force trap their feet and drag them into the ground. Their alarmed eyes lowered onto the ground, landing on a gargantuan black hole that covered their entire perimeter. No, no, no. Hundreds of Titans, be it those from the Titan domain or the immemorial, snarled as they fought against that suction force, thrashing with all their might. All to no avail. Startled by the screams, Sakura spun, fast enough to see his men collapse into the black holes, but too slow to intervene. Aoweawork. They growled as the black holes shredded them into bits of nothing and obliterate their aggrieved souls. Thus, of the 300 Titans and 10 immemorials that challenged the Myriad Dreams Valley, none remained. Only Bellows stood there, with blank, dazed eyes fit for a lifeless puppet. While Sakura's attention stood on Bellows, a vicious palm strike slammed his back, sending him hurtle through the sky in horizontal flight. But shockingly, the blow forced his soul out of his body while shredding the latter into ashes. This time, Sakura's body didn't reconstruct. Turning your back to the enemy is so rude. Do you think your name is Conrad? Tone down the conceit. Conrad shook his head in disapproval, while the alarmed Sakura stabilized his translucent soul in the sky. This succession of events had long since transcended all he could comprehend. Why could a truth and fate-transcendent expert not reconstruct his body? The answer came in the form of 25 locks that now swirled around Conrad's form. From those locks, Sakura could feel forces of absolute negation surging and permeating the atmosphere. Forbidden locks from the absolute negation physique. Realizing this, if before he still held some tiny hope, Sakura now knew he was doomed. A man must know to repay gratitude and grudges. Since you were so kind as to select me for the system, I reward you by sparing your grandson from obliteration. Instead, he can become my new devil puppet. What a glory! But doing that, I already no longer owe you anything. So what am I going to do with you? Conrad asked as his lips stretched in a psychotic grin. From that Empyrean face, Sakura could feel heaps of malevolence surging alongside the words. Although he'd long known of Conrad's nefarious nature, facing and knowing were indeed two different concepts. With your profound infiniteness insight, you can already squash early-stage primordial gods. With 25 locks of a forbidden physique, even mid-stage primordial gods turn into fodder. Challenging you, I am indeed bringing contempt upon myself. But you must know that even if you possessed cultivation equal to his excellency, you still can't defeat him. Your road is one of self-destruction. Sakura stated, ignoring Conrad's question. The world didn't believe Regretless invincible because of his high supreme strength. No, the root of his invincibility lay in his omniarch bloodline. Ruler of the Tao, ruler of tribulations, ruler of the living's essence. Faced with such might, who could resist? Celestial Slaughter's past failures stemmed from that bloodline. In the eyes of the firmament's experts, even if another high supreme rose, Regretless' throne was unshakable. Only the appearance of an almighty supreme, or the firmament's sovereign, could end his dominion. Conrad was, of course, well acquainted with the might of that blood. However, if it was truly unrivaled, Regretless would not have remained unable to reach quasi-firmament bloodline level. To be frank, in my eyes Regretless' threat has always been weaker than the old man's. However, this matter stands beyond your realm of competence. Conrad replied and stretched out his hand. Since you won't make the choice, allow me to choose for you. Primordial God-level cultivation is a rare commodity I ought to swallow. As the words left Conrad's lips, Sakura could feel his cultivation leave his discarnate soul and dive into Conrad's body. As it shrank, so did his spiritual awareness, and by the time the last bit vanished, he was no different from a wandering mortal soul. Chapter 536, Looting the Titan Domain. Conrad waved his hand, pulling Sakura's mortal soul toward him to examine it in its entirety. At first, he believed Sakura to be like him, the reincarnation of a past member of the Empyrean. After all, there was only one person Regretless could possibly pass down the shifting void step to: Highest Dragon's reincarnation. However, he soon dismissed that thought. If he were, Regretless wouldn't merely teach him the shifting void step or grant him a firmament fruit. He would put him on the highest pedestal and grant him all of the firmament's resources. With such conditions, Sakura would already be a peak stage primordial god. This treatment seemed more like an unofficial disciple's grooming. And indeed, as he examined Sakura's soul, Conrad couldn't find anything peculiar. But as he lost interest and readied to stop the browsing, he stumbled on something hidden so deep that only the mortal, collapsing state of Sakura's soul allowed it to shimmer. Seeing this, Conrad's eyes narrowed into a frown, and he trapped Sakura's soul into an infinite void space. Just a sliver. Where is the rest? Conrad wondered as he pondered his discovery. Burrowed within Sakura's soul was not a primordial seed but the sliver of a foreign existence that stood in harmony with Sakura, and just like with a primordial seed, would follow him throughout all incarnations. Because of the incomplete nature of that existence, Conrad couldn't determine who it was, but it didn't take a genius to guess. On a moment of weakness and due to a profound feeling of familiarity, Regretless passed down the shifting void step, unaware that Sakura was indeed his imperial uncle, or more accurately, a part of him. The situation was oddly familiar to one Conrad recently experienced. This discovery opened the road to many possibilities, all swirling around one question. What or who beyond primordial seeds could ensure the survival of the firmament's remnants without alerting Regretless? No matter how Conrad pondered the question, only one answer seemed reasonable. A nothingness supreme or something with the same abilities. There was no other way. Only by sealing them in nothingness could they escape the past tribulation. But then, why keep a part outside? And more importantly, why save them? The Omniverse gave birth to 3 supreme artifacts. My God Executing Immortal Sword, Regretless Heavenly Demon Tablet, and a third. No one knows where or what the third is, but following the pattern, it should be the Nothingness Supreme Artifact. If Celestial Slaughter didn't possess it, who did? If he did, why not use it in the final battle? In the past, with his Supreme Conqueror Sutra, Celestial Slaughter was unstoppable. Before him, fellow primordial gods were like ants. Only 2 people could thwart him, Dragon Warden with his God Executing Immortal Sword, and Regretless with his Omniarch Bloodline and Heavenly Demon Tablet. But if Celestial Slaughter also possessed a supreme artifact, especially one enabling him to suppress Regretless Bloodline, the past result would undoubtedly be reversed. Supreme artifacts chose their masters, typically individuals whose will perfectly match the artifact's spirit. If it wasn't Celestial Slaughter then, Conrad could only think of one other person. And if it was? A ludicrous thought flashed in his mind, and suddenly, Conrad's eyes brightened in enlightenment. I finally understand. How deviously cunning. That being the case, from the start, trying to shackle his return was impossible. Although lacking information prevented him from understanding some mysteries, Conrad now grasped the gist of the plot. And thinking of how Regretless labored against their past father, Conrad couldn't help but sigh. How could he thwart the return of someone who was never gone to begin with? With a smile, Conrad turned toward his forces. Since the Titan domain was so brazen as to invade our territory, we ought to pay them a visit. Don't we? Conrad rhetorically asked before raising his hand, causing the 150,000-man strong Chthonian devil legions to gather within the sky alongside his consorts, daughter, and disciple. All stood in order of position, with his relatives by his side and the dukes fronting the legions. Boundless devil force stifled the air, while the flabbergasted disciples of the Sea Dream Temple groveled in a crushing mixture of awe and dread. Same old rules, kill the men, take the women and plunder as you like, Conrad proclaimed while squalls of black devil force condensed behind him to form a massive, jet-black chariot driven by 4 black dragons. This was his personal vehicle, a new artifact of dreadful power enhanced by the 4 dragon puppets. Taking his place on the chariot, Conrad brought Selene, Verena, the Valkyrie, Heidi, and Cassilia alongside him, with Heidi cradled on his lap while the others sat on either side of him. As you command, Your Majesty. The 150,000 Chthonian devil forces took their places at the chariot's front, standing a step below in deference as they formed the vanguard and rear of this world invasion. The shroud surrounding the Sea Dream Temple vanished, and all those eyeing the Sea Dream Temple's conditions were startled to see the legions of Chthonian devils soaring from the Sea Dream Temple and rushing toward the Titan domain. Unrestrained, their devil force spread far and wide, stifling the already quivering Devis and driving many to collapse from the crushing devil scent. Night and blood neither saw it all, and with that ostentatious display they understood that Conrad was welcoming them to attack if they dared. But they didn't, and thus the devil's armies soared without disturbance, charging the Titan domain whose millions of denizens still expected their lord's grand victory. Meanwhile, realizing the destruction of their fellow elders and lord's life plates, the 400 remaining Titan elders took control of the Titan domain, attempting to again shift it in another location of the celestial realm. Alas, they couldn't move from an inch. A force, greater than anything they'd ever experienced, locked the entire domain. Zillions of tons, on the spot. How can this be? Why isn't the domain moving? An elder wondered in a stupor, and at that time, while those millions of unaware Titans still expected the grand return, those 400 elders felt a presence. No, a force of terrible evil reached the Titan domain's doorsteps. The Devil's Army? Instantly, the Titan elders realized the operation had not only failed but triggered the brutal retaliation of the one men should never offend. The Chthonian Primogen, 150,000 Chthonian devils flew ahead of a massive, jet-black chariot on top of which a man of Empyrean looks sat alongside unparalleled beauties that were undoubtedly his. The devils assumed their true forms. The dukes became 12 Chthonian dragons, while the 150,000 lower-ranked soldiers became humanoid, winged, horns, and fanged monstrosities tall of more than 1,000 meters. Ruahur. Star. A single, unified, barbaric roar burst from the legion's throats alongside crushing devil force as they landed in the Titan domain, alarming its millions of denizens. Fright and complete incomprehension filled the Titans, while their despondent elders rose to face the enemy. Chthonian Primogen, don't go too far. The Titan domain isn't easily bold-dash. The great elder began, but before he could finish his words, Conrad's 4 dragon puppets opened their maws, releasing pitch-black beams of crackling lightning and devil flames. The beams swallowed the 400 Titan elders, stopping them mid-flight as they thrashed in the black flames and crackling lightning, torn by horrendous torments. Aoweawork. They howled in grief. By the time the beams dispersed, the burning forms of the howling elders tumbled onto a border town of the Titan domain, creating an earthquake while the fire consuming them spread to the nearby folks. Unsightly. The wisest man that never lived once said that the only ones who should kill are those who are prepared to be killed. Since you have the nerve to challenge me, face the consequences with some dignity. Legionaries, extinguish this world. Conrad ordered, and the 4 words echoed in the mind of not only the legionaries, but the millions of denizens of Titan domain. As you command, Your Majesty. Chapter 537, Straightening Hell. It was pure slaughter. Although the millions of Titans comprised hundreds of thousands of gods, they were absolutely no match for the Chthonian devil legions. As the elders burned to ashes, dark purple flames, lightning and tridents rained from the sky, tearing the Titan domain's lives to shreds. 3 waves of ranged attacks unfurled before the devils descended from the sky, hacking at the runaway Titans with fangs, claws, talons, and blades. The Titans were like overgrown herbs before relentless scythes, their number irrelevant, and their powerlessness evident as the Chthonian devils harvested their lives and grew mightier on their corpses. In a flash, the previously prosperous Titan domain became a world of flames, a world of anguish, a world of death. Mountains collapsed, seas rose in tidal waves, storms crashed ancestral monuments. The sky turned pitch black and calamity washed the land. Less than 2 hours following the grand invasion, the Titan domain saw its entire male population extinguished while the female fell into captivity. After selecting the most outstanding for his personal use, Conrad gave the rest to his meritorious officials, with the higher ranked obtaining the better share. Meanwhile, the treasures and wealth of the Titan domain were pocketed without exception, leaving only a corpse-drenched world of flaming ruins. Without any further interest in that land, Conrad turned heels, leading his chariot away from the collapsing Titan domain. At his back, the 12 dragon dukes opened their maws, releasing dark purple beams of pure devil forces that burst what remained of the domain into ashes. Thus ended the Titan domain. But undoubtedly, their bloodline would carry one within the Chthonian realm. Yet, as the victorious Chthonian devil legions returned to the Sea Dream Temple, the Devis felt no joy. Particularly those deities that bore witness to the Titan domain's calamity couldn't even breathe a sigh of relief. Dreadful. Completely and utterly dreadful. The Chthonian devils felt deeds and savagery shocked and choked them where they stood. Today, it was the Titans. Tomorrow it could be them. Fear gripped them all. The Brahmas were no exception. From heaven to hell, the news then spread that as many feared, the Chthonian primogen was very much alive, and as barbaric as ever. But if the Titan domain's destruction should have alarmed the demons, it didn't. They had bigger fish to fry. From within the northern domain, startling news spread that Dahlgren, the mightiest infernal king and recently promoted half-step over god, was killed and overthrown by 3 mysterious women whose devil force all linked to the Chthonian primogen. Taking control of the northern domain and slaughtering the Azuras into submission, Yvonne, Else, and Gulistan cast their eyes on the entirety of hell and dispatched troops to conquer it once and for all. The eastern king, Asherah, was startled to see his ally, the western king, Urzel, invade his domain alongside 3 peak-stage legendary gods and legions of demonic forces. Urzel, dastardly son of a bitch, how dare you? Are you going to hand over hell to foreign entities? Asherah snarled in outrage, while leading his vampiric armies and blood fiends into battle. Alas, with 4 peak-stage legendary gods at the helm, 3 of which boasted death embodiments, they were no match for the invaders and could only retreat. Damn it all! Asherah roared and burned his blood, causing his might to explode as he charged his 4 foes. But before he could reach them, a wall of dreadful pressure slammed into him, sending him reeling backward. The slender figures of 3 profane beauties appeared in the sky, all rippling with massive devil force. Yvonne, Else, and Gulistan. Facing them, and sensing that prime devil cultivation whose might didn't lose out to his peak-stage legendary god strength, Asherah knew who he was dealing with. Worse, the emerald-eyed, overbearing beauty of unmatched sex appeal that stood at the helm of the other 2 showcased a cultivation base that already surpassed the legendary god limit. Mid-stage prime devil, no worse than an early-stage overgod. No wonder you could and dared kill Dahlgren. You probably don't even fear the Overlord. However, if you think I will give up without a fight, you are delusional. Asherah took his final stand, while Yvonne's slit eyes nailed him with stabbing derision. I don't need to think of it. I only need to command it. She scoffed and stretched out her right hand, causing the acme of life laws to erupt as she aimed her right index at Asherah. Instantly, the blood god felt all the life essence within his body vanish alongside his cultivation base, while he dropped onto his knees, unable to rise, unable to resist. Life, embodiment, Asherah stammered, full of skepticism as his body quivered under Yvonne's irresistible might. Hearing this, she sneered. The vision of infernal kings is indeed pitifully low, to even mistake transcendence for embodiment. Pathetic. Yvonne's snide had not even properly rang in Asherah's ears that she snapped her fingers, causing him to burst into a blood fog, obliterated in body and soul. However, decent puppets are hard to come by. Rejoice, you can now serve the Jade Dynasty throughout eternity. Yvonne declared, and shockingly, the lingering blood fog condensed into a brand new Asherah, reborn from the dead, but without an ounce of defiance within his gaze. Greetings, mistress. Asherah hailed and dropped on his knees, willingly this time. Life and death transcendence. Yvonne, you really are annoying. Gulistan, who'd now reached death transcendence, said from Yvonne's left, while the chilly, truth transcendent else silently approved. At first, they believed they were quickly catching up, but once Yvonne became aware of Blood Nether's presence in the celestial realm, her cultivation speed again shot up, and in the recent months of secluded cultivation, she not only bypassed them by one level, but achieved a second transcendence. Naturally, her bloodline strength rose accordingly. That's my job. Yvonne leisurely replied while the demonic armies under their command swathed the eastern domain and subjugated all dissidents. Be that as it may, Conrad has no more use for a recalcitrant hell. It's time to kill the Overlord. Yvonne pursued while casting her almond eyes toward the central domain, only remainder of hell's resistance. Gulistan and Elsa's lips curled into a smile, and in tandem, the three devil consorts shot toward the central domain. Chapter 538, Exposing Moon. But as the infernal realm experienced the brutal reorganization of Conrad's most favored, the celestial world didn't have it easy. Following his return, in his competence of Myriad Dreams Valley Lord and Thonian Primogen, Conrad officially overthrew the Sea Dream Temple, making it become the branch instead of the master force. Meanwhile, the Heaven Warding Temple aside, the entirety of the celestial realm was brought under his banner through the Legion's irresistible military power and the dreadful name of his profane self. With the Titan's fall serving as a fresh reminder, few dared oppose this change of things, and none did out loud. Better, the wiser sect leaders desperately sought an attachment to the Myriad Dreams Valley, either directly or with the Sea Dream Temple as proxy. Meanwhile, within the Myriad Dreams Valley's main hall, Conrad sat on his Valley Lord throne with Verena, Heidi, Selene, the Valkyrie, and Cassilia on either side of him. Rathi, however, stood beneath the stairs, staring at the 7 pills swirling above Conrad's head. Marble white and glittering in the purest of heavenly luminescence, she didn't doubt that those 7 pills would put Conrad's partiality and nepotism to a major test. I'm curious. What exactly are those pills, and how did you refine them? Rathi asked with her eyes narrowed at the heaven-swallowing pills. Of course, in reality her eyesight allowed her to grasp 80% of the truth already. I baptized them heaven-swallowing pills, but a more accurate name would be realm-swallowing pills. Conrad began with an amused smile while his icy blue eyes locked Rathi's magenta hues. Using fate-gathering veins, I robbed heaven's destiny, concentrating it solely on my Myriad Dreams Valley. Now, all fortuitous encounters throughout the celestial realm can only occur in my Myriad Dreams Valley. With the destiny as my foundation, my profound infiniteness as the furnace, and my devil bridge as the medium, I drained the core of the celestial realm's spiritual energies and refined 8 pills out of them. Soon, heaven's spiritual energy quantity will drop to 0. However, with those pills, an early-stage prime devil can undoubtedly rise to the peak. Conrad replied in a level tone. Yet, even with those simple words, his voice was like a honeyed melody that soothed the mind and quieted unrest. For a second, Rithi wished to close her eyes and enjoy the tune. However, she restrained herself. I can feel that your cultivation took another step, Rithi remarked as her eyes shifted from those inconceivable pills to stare at Conrad's lounging form. Indeed, after draining Sakra's cultivation, I've already taken half a step into the anti-god realm. Unfortunately, the energy requirements are becoming outrageous. I'm afraid I will soon have to hunt peak stage overgods, or even primordial gods for fast breakthroughs. Conrad sighed while Rithi's eyes widened in disbelief, and her lips curled into an O. Sakra? That man was Sakra? The great primal ancestor? How can this be dash? Rithi began, but before she could finish her words, Conrad shook his head. Cut the act. It was funny at first, but it's now getting annoying. Conrad cut, while sending his ladies a mental message. Instantly, they nodded and left the hall. Now, only Conrad and the astounded Rithi remained behind. Act? What do you mean by that? Rithi's eyes blinked and narrowed in a show of puzzlement, while her lips pursed and confusion laced her tone. Conrad's smile remained unchanged. Moon, you were never a good actress. Stop this nonsense. As the words echoed, Rithi's blinking stopped, the confusion vanished, and her lips curled into a smirk. Oh, exposed already? How frustrating. Moon replied, and her appearance changed, going from Rithi's peerless beauty to the figure of a young woman with back-length, blood-red hair and eyes. Dressed in a purple, backless dress, with luminous skin, perfect full lips and engrossing phoenix eyes that only served to strengthen the effect of her flawless curves, that woman stood with a transcendental beauty putting the sun and moon to shame. But that change was of minimal consequence when compared to her cultivation base, which went from the early stage of the legendary god rank straight to the peak of the primordial god rank, thereby marking that woman as one of the mightiest individuals of all realms. When did you recognize me? Moon asked while crossing the stairs to stop before Conrad. Since you killed Kama, of course. But then again, it's not like you were trying to not get recognized. Conrad leisurely replied while his eyes remained locked on Moon's crimson hues. Nodding in approval, she knelt beside his right thigh and while resting her elbows on it, held her cheeks within her cupped hands. Touché. The game was about how long you took to spot me, not about forever evading discovery. Thank you for humoring me. It made the whole thing more exciting. Moon's acknowledgement was followed by a snap of her fingers, and in a twister of crimson moonlight, an unconscious Rithi appeared right above the stairs. Conrad waved his left hand, and Rithi vanished from the scene to land on her bed within the Sea Dream Temple. Though, I'm curious. Back when you arrived, there was no way you could have known my position. Why did you choose her? Conrad inquired, causing Moon's lips to widen in a wolfish grin. Because she's the most beautiful, of course. Having done my homework, I could guess that as long as you stayed in heaven, you would undoubtedly target its most beautiful Devi. Rithi and the Sea Dream Temple would be your first stop. When your bloodline reached quasi-firmament level and caused the firmament tree to resonate, Bloodnether and I traced the link to heaven. After you played that trick on her, I researched the celestial world and chose the Sea Dream Temple as my destination. To prevent suspicion, I waited for you to create your sect, the moment when you were deep in pill refinement and providing guidance to your daughter and disciple to make my move. Using my truth transcendence, I took Rithi's spot and trapped her in a miniature space world of mine. She never saw it coming. Moon explained while studying the changes in Conrad's expression. There were none, at least not that she could see. Setting games aside, what do you want? You, of course you. The response was instantaneous, and in that brief exchange, the intensity of their stares rose by 10,000-fold, creating palpable tension onlookers would have found unnerving. Regretless will die by my sword. That is inevitable. Anyone that stands on my path to becoming the sovereign ruler of the Omniverse, I'll either tame or kill. The entirety of your little family is doomed to get torn by me. Knowing that, you still wish to stand by me? Make no mistake, I am not that dragon warden and have zero tolerance for indecisiveness. You can only be 300% with me. Conrad clarified, and as if prepared for those words, Moon nodded in approval. How about taking my cultivation base? Moon offered, making the unprepared Conrad arch his eyebrows. Chapter 539, The Warden's Invitation. Come again? Conrad couldn't help but ask, for indeed this was no laughing matter. Moon was no run-of-the-mill goddess, but an entity standing at the summit of the primordial god rank. Even with the appeal of the Devil Bridge, that kind of cultivation wasn't something anyone could give up. After all, in pure cultivation level, assuming Conrad turned her into a devil, she would need to reach the early stage of the Devil Monarch realm to recover her past strength. There was absolutely no guarantee she could get there in a short time. This was no laughing matter. My cultivation base, I will let you harvest it in its entirety. Afterward, I'm afraid my standing will no longer be mine to determine. Is that sufficient? She reiterated, apparently undisturbed by the implications. Although in theory, triple transcendence was equal to a mid-stage primordial god in battle power, in practice, there was no such thing as a primordial god that didn't transcend in at least one law. Therefore, although her strength would not outright vanish, Moon's standing as one of the 6 strongest individuals of the Omniverse was about to collapse. However, she didn't care. If that donation was enough to regain lost trust, what need was there to think? However, there is one thing I must remind you of. On the list of the strongest individuals of the Omniverse, Knight ranks 3rd, right after the Dharma Lord. Underestimating him is unwise, and I can feel that he now stands in the heaven-warding temple. Knowing him, a surprise awaits you there. Moon cautioned while maintaining eye contact, but her warnings were wholly unnecessary. Conrad didn't doubt that for Knight to break his curse that quickly, he'd already achieved profound nothingness insight. Although his mastery of life laws was horribly low, with his triple transcendence and peak stage primordial god cultivation base, his current strength couldn't be underestimated. But little did Moon know that Conrad possessed 2 forbidden physiques, the Might Reversal physique with 27 broken locks, and the Absolute Negation physique with 25. Add to that his quasi-firmament bloodline and firmament bridge, and throughout the Omniverse, Conrad definitely ranked among the strongest. Once he regained his sword, Knight was the one that should be worrying about his life. My words may say otherwise, but unlike you folks, I never underestimate my foes. Knight can't raise any waves. In those words, an unbreakable assurance rippled, making Moon wonder where Conrad's supreme confidence came from. Though your confidence is indeed charming and your potential unrivaled, you should know that what you're up against is not merely Knight. With Knight's cultivation level and strength, why can I so easily sense him? Because the 5 of us share a special bond forged by regretless supreme will. Did you ever think that so long as Knight, Bloodnether, or any of us is harmed, regretless would awake? And when he does, what can you do? Moon inquired in a tone that made evident the gravity of the situation. You must have heard this often. The Omniarch is invincible, and I know that for you who possesses the only quasi-firmament bloodline, it is hard to digest. But the truth is not that far. After all, when Regretless killed 8 of the Firmament's Supremes and sent the Dharma Lord into hiding, he just reached all transcendence. 9 Supremes versus 1, and it was a one-sided stomp. Moon pursued, and although he'd already seen that battle through Bloodnether's memories, Conrad couldn't help but inwardly praise Regretless' dreadful battle power. It only took one blow to exterminate 8 Supremes and send one into perpetual hiding. His cultivation bridge thrives on hatred. The more hatred and suffering he feels, the stronger he becomes. That is why the ancients refer to him as Tribulation Demon. You are the reminder, and celestial slaughter the embodiment of all he loathes. With the 2 of you gathering in this era, his strength will undoubtedly rise to another level. The current situation isn't yet hopeless. Take over Hell's will, expel Bloodnether and Knight, swallow Heaven's will, and barricade yourself in the 3 realms. As a High Supreme, Regretless may be able to break your control of a universe, but he cannot do the same with a multiverse. Moon advised. But at that time, an ancient, genderless voice echoed within the celestial world and broke realm barriers to resound even within hell. In half a month, the Heaven-Warding Temple will hold a grand gathering of the three realms' top deities to determine the fate of the god executing immortal sword. Demons, devas, spirits, humans, and devils are all welcome. Whoever can obtain the sword's approval may freely take it away. Whoever wishes to destroy it may give it a shot. The warden declared, startling all deities throughout heaven and hell. Hearing this, Conrad's lips curled into a smile. Singular hatred might have helped him in the past, but in this era, it shall be his doom. The times have changed. In the race for eternal dominion, Regretless has already lost. Conrad replied and closed his eyes, sending a succession of mental messages to his forces. Meanwhile, within the infernal realm, as the central domain suffered an unprecedented attack, demons and fiends were startled to see hell's strongest, the Overlord, battered into flight by a riveting woman whose overflowing devil force clearly branded as a devil. It was a one-sided stomp, with the Overlord's every moves effortlessly thwarted by that emerald-eyed beauty, whose absurdly long hair fluttered against her calves in an entrancing dance. An emerald spear of endless life and death essence tore the sky, carrying alongside it a surge of mind-boggling bloodline strength and laws that put all throughout hell on their knees. It was as if in that one spear, the mysteries of life and death stood in harmony, not only brought to the acme but defying their predetermined concepts. Before that spear, though his cultivation now stood at the early stage of the overgod rank, the Overlord couldn't even muster the will to resist. In a black and emerald light vortex, the spear streaked through the Overlord and cratered in his capital right below. For an instant, the Overlord stood still, with his bloodshot eyes opened wide, staring at Yvonne's engrossing form in the greatest show of consternation of his ancient life. Who could think that so soon after becoming an overgod the Overlord could never finish his words. From head to toe his body split into two perfect halves, and soundlessly, they burst into light particles. Within his domain, within the infernal realm, in a 1-versus-1 clash, the Overlord was butchered. The road to Hell's Will was officially open. Chapter 540 Leaping Forward. On that day, the archdemons vowed to fight to the last, ready to trade their lives to avenge their lord. Alas, willpower alone couldn't thwart destiny. And since in life they wouldn't obey, the three devil consorts wiped them all out, building a new undead army out of their remains. On that same day, they abolished the lordship of the infernal nobility and established a temporary triumvirate with Yvonne as the head triumvir, and Gulistan and Else as the junior triumvir. Now, as far as the infernal realm was concerned, the warden's announcement was of little consequence. No demon could ever take part in that gathering. And as expected, the fall of the Overlord didn't go without repercussion. Hell's Will awoke, stabbed by the loss of its law enforcer, and unleashed the most dreadful of infernal tribulations the demons had ever seen on the entirety of hell. Alas, Hell's wrath met an impregnable formation erected through the three devil consorts' transcendence and reinforced by Kron's devil force. Though the will's anger grumbled day and night, among the demons, fiends, and humans, life carried on. A certain infernal king observed all those changes with rapt attention. By the time Conrad finished dispatching his orders, Kron's voice echoed within his mind. Master, Hell's takeover is complete. After reaching the mid-stage of the prime devil realm and double transcendence, Her Majesty led their graces into a large-scale invasion and put down the infernal realm. The Overlord has just been killed by Her Majesty. Hell's Will made its move, but was suppressed by our devil formation. However, it shows no sign of relenting. Kron explained through a mental message, causing Conrad's lips to curl into a bright smile. Flawless timing. And here I was about to dispatch troops. Well done. Conrad approved and raised his right hand, causing 3 heaven-swallowing pills to fly toward a palm-sized realm gash he'd just opened. I have 3 new pills for them. After refining them, their strength will rise by leaps and bounds. The true times of calamity are approaching with great strides. We must all grow at a rapid pace. While Conrad's words echoed in Kron's mind, the 3 pills crossed the realm gash to land before him, and as he pocketed them, the gravity in his master's tone didn't escape him. Master, will Talroth soon make his move? Indeed, even Hells can't keep dropping tribulation lightning forever. There will be a time when it weakens and makes a last-ditch effort. Talroth will use it to make his move. At that time, I believe the entire platform of the Omniverse will experience startling changes. Conrad replied. Though he knew Talroth counted on him to destroy Hell's will, he didn't plan to stop that motion. The reason was simple. Even if he didn't in time, someone else would. That being the case, he might as well profit from it and use their ploy to secure his position in the upcoming war. And being privy to Conrad's thoughts, Kron understood that though he let nothing transpire, a tinge of frustration lingered in Conrad's mind. Master, is there really no way to foil his plan? Kron couldn't help but ask. However, Conrad shook his head. If my conjecture is right, in this world, only Regretless can prevent this plot from coming to fruition. However, to say nothing of the fact that he's currently unconscious. Even if he wasn't, would he sacrifice his life to prevent it? Impossible. And even if he did, it would only solve a third of the problem. Conrad inwardly sighed. And though she couldn't hear the ongoing conversation, Moon didn't doubt it didn't put him in a jovial mood. Never mind. At the end of the day, strength is the righteous path. There ought to be a void mirror physique owner within the higher realms. Once I swallow the wills, I can find it. They may think their plan flawless, but in the future, we will have the means to dispose of them. The void mirror physique was the 3rd forbidden physique. If he could snatch it and unlock 30 locks of all 3 physiques, then in the future, even if Conrad wasn't an absolute supreme, it would be as if the connection ended, and Conrad lowered his eyes on Moon, who still knelt by his side. By harvesting your cultivation, I can rise to mid-stage anti-god. In these chaotic times, I will never refuse such an offer. However, as for whether I bring you onto the Devil Road or not, that is still a matter of debate. Knowing that, are you still willing? Conrad directly asked, and in response, Moon stood up, undoing the straps of her purple dress and letting it slide onto the ground to reveal her splendidly shaped body. Seeing this, Conrad's lips curled into a wolfish grin. That being the case, welcome to my household, Conrad declared, before rising from his seat to pull Moon into a hot and steamy harvesting session, at the end of which his cultivation rose to mid-stage anti-god. On pure cultivation alone, he was now equal to an early-stage primordial god. Afterward, Conrad stepped into Rathi's chambers, awakening from her slumber to bring her up to date. However, it seemed that while she remained trapped in Moon's miniature world, she didn't miss anything of those events. Nearly 2 months in Moon's world gave her ample time for self-introspection. There was no more need for acclamation. Instead, she did the only rational thing she could think of and threw herself in Conrad's arms. Another heated sex romp followed, and during the mating, Conrad not only welcomed Rathi onto the Devil Road, but with the massive devil force he released through dual cultivation, helped her directly reach the peak of the boundless sea devil realm. Although her starting point lost to the rest, with his rod at her disposal, it wouldn't be long before she caught up. Afterward, from Kron, Conrad received several vials of blood origin collected by Yvonne in her takeover of the infernal realm. The various downed demon primogens' blood origins stood in the midst alongside the Overlord's archdemon blood. As for those 4 primogens killed by Talroth, she replaced them with the blood origins of their children. After refining them all, the abilities of all races within the 3 realms were now Conrad's to control. The barrier toward the firmament bloodline level crumbled further. Only one last push remained. For the following half-month, Conrad strengthened his forces. The remaining 4 heaven-swallowing pills he gave to Celine, Verena, and the Valkyrie. Due to the legions she fed, the Valkyrie received twice the share. And while the consorts reached the peak of the prime devil realm and sought to comprehend the mysteries of the anti-god realm, Conrad spent his time between dual cultivation with Heidi, Cassilia, Raythi, his various consorts, and providing better devil pills to his legions. As the deadline approached its end, Moon was officially brought onto the Devil Road, thenceforth bound to their ship. The legion's strength sharply rose, with the 12 dukes now standing at the late stage of the prime devil realm and approaching the peak. Of course, such rapid progress mainly relied on time gimmicks and the batches of anti-god pills Conrad consecutively refined. Naturally, in terms of celestial lives, the production of those pills came at a hefty price. Meanwhile, his fate devil, the only non-transcendent of the three, approached transcendence with great strides. When the deadline knocked on their doorsteps, Conrad had reached the late stage of the anti-god realm. With Blood Nether, he planned to reach the peak. The dukes all became half-step anti-gods, while the likes of Verena reached the early stage of the anti-god realm, and Yvonne stood at the mid-stage. The time for the god-executing immortal conference had come. Chapter 541 The Nun Beside the Pond. Although his current strength wasn't what the likes of Blood Nether could contend with, knowing that a trap lay ahead, Conrad wouldn't blindly dive into the conference. Rather, he had Wolfgang and the other dukes gather the Legion's special forces for an ambush. They first snuck into the heaven-warding domain, surrounding the temple's main mountain from the shadows while awaiting Conrad's next directives. Alone, Conrad snuck into the heaven-warding temple. Little did the Brahmas know that as legions of guests filled their halls, the Chthonian Primogen walked among them, disguised as a Yaksha void god. Nowadays, following successions of calamities, heaven's deity quantity had shrunk to an abysmal level. High gods and above either lay in the Sea Dream Temple, Myriad Dreams Valley, or Heaven Warding Temple. Naturally, the former two and those seeking to curry their favors didn't dispatch any representative. Therefore, only those rogue cultivators trying to fish in troubled waters or with ambitions exceeding their abilities flooded the Heaven Warding Temple. Nihility god guests were nigh impossible to see. Of course, some merely came out of curiosity. After all, none doubted that the Chthonian Primogen would make a move. This event was bound to trigger mighty waves. Led by Paragon spirit gods, the guests were directed to the core zone where the conference would take place. Since he still had a few hours before the fun began, Conrad left to enjoy the scenery. With his devil sense leading the way, Conrad crossed the scenic places of the heaven-warding temple to reach an artificial forest. Though, since the forest was built through nature laws, the word artificial wasn't wholly accurate. Conrad stepped in, crossing a grove of exotic, celestial fruits to reach a small pond away from all the bluster currently animating the heaven-warding temple and breaking its tranquility. There, a Brahma nun sat cross-legged with a prayer bead in her right hand, and her eyes shut close. Although he currently stood behind her, with his panoramic vision, Conrad could see the nun's figure in its entirety. With silver hair stopping at the nape of her neck and gray mist swirling around her slender form, she could have been mistaken for a paragon spirit if not for the celestial radiance gleaming from her porcelain skin. And though the oversized saffron robe desperately tried to hide the nun's cantaloupe-sized breasts and curvy, but they couldn't escape Conrad's eyes, creating an enticing contrast with her narrow waist as she went through her prayer bead. But as Conrad's presence dawned onto her, she stopped, and without dropping the prayer bead, said, "This pond isn't a place foreigners are meant to step into. Considering that this is an unintended offense, I can let you go. Depart at once." Though mild in tone, the nun's words echoed like an irresistible command. At least, an ordinary deity wouldn't have been able to resist it. Alas, ordinary, Conrad was not. "How can I leave when I came for you?" Conrad replied while stepping closer toward the nun. Instantly, she was startled to feel the space around them isolated from the celestial realm. Though they still stood in the same spot, it was as if they dived into another dimension. If before, Conrad's words filled the nun with puzzlement, As she turned her masterfully carved face toward him, she no longer had any doubt regarding his identity. I have long heard that the Chthonian Primogen revels in theatric acts, but little did I expect I would one day get to personally appreciate it. With your status and strength, are such petty disguises necessary? The riveting nun asked as Conrad sat beside her. Right back at you. Billions of years spent masquerading as a man. How dull. Warden, aren't you bored? With your status and strength, why was that necessary? Conrad sighed with a tinge of sorrow, causing the warden to arch her thin eyebrows. I suppose nothing can escape the devil's sight. Though, masquerade is quite the overstatement. When did you ever hear a Deva Primogen refer to the warden as he? I merely conceal my real appearance on official matters to avoid nonsense. The warden replied, while turning her face from Conrad to stare at the pond before them. And hearing this, Conrad was forced to agree that while the mortals and various deities of the three realms typically referred to the warden as he, the Primogens never did so. Like Chandra? Conrad couldn't help but ask. Clearly, in the past the lecherous Primogen drooled at the warden's attributes and made remarks he couldn't afford, thereby triggering her retaliation. A pity that unlike the Overlord, the warden cannot directly kill misbehaving Primogens. A life worse than death is the best I can offer. Otherwise, that little pig wouldn't have fallen to your tricks. As far as the warden was concerned, it was now evident that Chandra's fall and subsequent events were orchestrated by Conrad. Although back then she had her doubts, an opportunity to get rid of Chandra wasn't easily obtained. Therefore, she kept her mouth shut. Hearing the warden's acknowledgement, Conrad nodded in approval. In the past, I dreamed of having the warden and the overlord as my imperial eunuchs. However, when you revealed yourself to be a buxom beauty, that ship sank. Someone must account for my destroyed dreams and pay just due. That someone is naturally you. How are you going to do that? Conrad seriously asked, causing the warden to blink in disbelief. In her immeasurably long life, rarely had she heard such shameless words. Still, she didn't lose her composure. Oh, I'm not sure I want to ask, but how exactly could I do that? She inquired while closing her silver eyes. Naturally, by joining my imperial harem. I promise to treat you well. As Conrad's leisurely words echoed, as if struck by an invisible dart, the warden dropped her prayer bead and trembled in her seat. Undisturbed, Conrad pursued. Allow me to be blunt. The celestial realm has reached the end of its destiny. Hell is no better. At the end of this day, there will be no more heaven, no more hell, only my Chthonian realm shall remain. The unification of the three realms begins and ends today. If you wish to still have a place in the new multiverse, joining my banner is your only option. Conrad declared with a confidence that left no room for any other outcome. Chapter 542, Lobbying the Warden. The unification of the three realms begins and ends today. If anyone else spoke such words, the warden wouldn't have spared them a glance. But coming from Conrad's lips, she couldn't help but acknowledge them. Although those foreign deities' strength stood beyond what she could estimate, when did the Chthonian Primogen ever pick a fight he'd not already won? While the opponent's confidence reached its acme, he would release his cards and crush them with absolute strength. On this day, she didn't favor those primordial's odds. However, it was one thing that his victory was certain, another that the warden turned into another one of his toys. Chthonian Primogen, how many consorts do you have? The warden calmly asked while picking up her meditation beads. Undisturbed by the inquiry, Conrad arched his back and rolled his eyes as if making a quick mental calculation. The numbers recently swelled, and I've now reached 12,021. The words had barely left Conrad's lips that the warden broke into an abrupt coughing session. Cough, 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 cough. Feeling the woman's plight, Conrad gently tapped her back, sapping the coughing out of her lungs. A man shouldn't be too greedy. Are you trying to dual cultivate to death? The warden blurted, speaking words even she found foreign. But when the notion of 12,021 harem members swirled in her mind, She couldn't help but find her words wholly accurate. Conrad, however, shook his head. Nonsense. When even a mortal king dared house a harem of 16,000, how can the profane prince not have more than 10,000? This is but a starting point. After I extinguish my foes and tame the omniverse, I will definitely expand it to 30,000. Conrad pledged, making the warden wonder if his cock hadn't grown sore from all the plugging. Try it and you'll know, Conrad said with a wolfish grin, reminding the warden that her thoughts weren't her own. Hum. Ranks? 6,000 low-ranked consorts, 3,000 mid-ranked consorts, 1,600 noble consorts, 800 revered consorts, 600 holy consorts, 15 divine consorts, 4 jade consorts, 1 jade dowager, 1 jade empress. Across the centuries, a few more ladies naturally joined the ranks of the divine consorts. As for the extra 2 jade consorts, Rithi and Celine claimed those spots. The knowledge that the dowager ranked below the empress and among the consorts didn't escape the warden's acute mind. But knowing that it was Tauritha's blood sitting next to her, she didn't think much of it. And where exactly would I rank in all that? I still need 1 jade consort. I initially reserved the spot for Asmodeus, but she's probably trapped in some miniature world, or worse, a nothingness seal, whereas you are very much available. You could have it. However, I assign my harem ranks depending on a mixture of skills and bias, so it will still depend on your performance. For a second, the straightforwardness with which Conrad said those words took the warden aback. But then she remembered who she was dealing with, and it all seemed natural. Unfortunately, the choice isn't mine to make. So long as heavens will stand, no man can be intimate with me. You are no exception. Meanwhile, as Conrad made the warden's personal acquaintance, the Heaven Warding Temple accepted its last guests and closed its doors. The guests were then led into a massive arena in the middle of which a 3 meters long greatsword lay planted in a stone altar. With no peculiar energy rippling from it, the sword would have appeared quite inconspicuous if not for the obsidian metal that made its blade. But though that sword appeared as still as a rock, there wasn't one knowledgeable deity on the scene that didn't quiver in its presence. And when faced with the blade that could slay all, when faced with the god-executing immortal sword, how could they not? According to past records, regular blood offerings from a legendary god or above are necessary to keep the sword silent. One can only wonder how much of the warden's blood it absorbed across the eons. A young man with mid-long black hairs and a red bindi-like mark in the middle of his forehead whispered as he intently stared at the sword. He was the Titan Lord's only surviving son, having escaped the calamity due to his father dispatching him to the Heaven Warding Temple to inform the primordials of Sakra's plans. At first, he begrudged that assignment, thinking it unsuited for his station, and resenting that while his brothers followed their father into battle, he would be playing the errand boy. Little did he expect that assignment to save his life. But so what if he was alive? His entire family, his world, had completely been exterminated, leaving behind specks of dust and squalls of shame. Worse, the rumors that the Thonian devil armies slew the men but captured the women stabbed him day and night. Perhaps at this very moment, his mother, sisters, and wife all stood impaled on some barbaric devil's shaft, suffering untold humiliation. The mere thought reddened his eyes, and as veins bulged on his temple, he cursed the Thonian primogen's profane name. Thonian primogen, I Rajan swear to seize the god-executing immortal sword, become the 4th god of war, and take your wretched life. Rajan inwardly pledged while the anguish of his losses, the pain and humiliation gashed him as if he trod on a road of broken glasses. Planning to use him as a lure, Knight used this half-month to vigorously train him, letting him catch up to the fallen Titan Lord at breakneck speed. Although he didn't have full assurance that Rajan could pull out the sword, if he could, no matter where Conrad hid, he would show up. In the tribunes, amidst the sea of guests, Bloodnether's immortal Blood Guard and Knight's eternal Night Guard hid, ready to attack at the first sign of Thonian presence. Better, the entirety of the arena had long since been turned into a peerless formation, ready to be activated at any time. As long as Conrad appeared, regardless of the result of his clash with Blood Nether, Knight didn't doubt he couldn't escape his palm. Chapter 543, The Last God of War Part 1. Deities from all sides, thank you for joining us all for this once-in-a-billion-years event, the God Executing Immortal Conference. A gray light column descended from the sky, illuminating the arena while revealing the form of a middle-aged Paragon Spirit man. Paragon spirits were flawed creations of the Brahma, originally meant to help them guide all living things on the path of enlightenment. Their complete emotional spectrum created too great a variety of individuals, with many unsuited for such a lifestyle. Seeing this, the Brahmas reconverted them to servants and managers. On those rare occasions that deities gathered in the heaven-warding temple, it was the Paragon spirit's duty to host and entertain them. Knowing that the Brahmas simply didn't have the skills necessary for such tasks, none took offense. Moreover, this Paragon spirit was one of the first of the race, created by the Warden herself, with high bloodline strength and a peak stage ancestral god cultivation base. On the scene, the concealed experts aside, none was worth his presence. As you all know, following the fall of the third god of war, aware that this sword could unleash unending calamities, the Warden made the decision to hide it from the world, keeping it pacified in the heaven-warding temple. Across those billions of years, it was the Warden's relentless blood sacrifice that allowed the sword to remain under control, thereby preventing calamities for the masses. As his words reached that point, the Paragon's spirit ancestor paused and heaved a deep sigh of flashy sorrow. But though they let nothing transpire on their faces, inwardly, the guests sneered. Clearly, the Warden wished to study the sword's innumerable mysteries for personal gains and was only recently exposed. How did it become a matter of altruism? Naturally, knowing was one thing, saying another. None of those deities dared expose this bit of theater. However, in the face of peerless treasures, friendships are forgotten and the righteous viewed in suspicion. Knowing that the world now questions the past motives, in a last show of sincerity, the Warden invited you all to settle the sword's fate. There are no rules. Whoever wishes to lay hands on the sword is free to give it a try. To seize or to destroy it is all up to you. The Paragon's spirit ancestor exclaimed and motioned toward the sword plunged in the stone altar. The God Executing Immortal Conference officially begins. Following those words, the Paragon's spirit vanished in a twister of gray winds, leaving behind an oppressive silence. None dared make a move. On the scene, there wasn't one individual considering destroying the God Executing Immortal Sword. None could even gather that thought. The firmament's hidden experts were no different. Better than the denizens of the three realms, they understood what that sword was. Throughout the Omniverse, only one could possibly muster enough strength to destroy it, the Omniarch. Him aside, none had the qualifications to give it a shot. Seizing it, however, that was another story. Many of the feeble deities on the scene only held a shallow understanding of the sword. The rogue cultivators, in particular, knew it as an incomparably formidable weapon, but no more. The knowledge that without a legendary god cultivation base or above, any attempt to seize the sword would end in surefire death eluded the majority. Still, they could guess that a weapon requiring the Warden's blood offerings couldn't be obtained that easily. Worse, whoever did manage to lay hands on it would become the target of public condemnation, assailed from all sides with no room to escape. They better have peerless strength. And without assurance to leave this place alive, what point was there in seizing the sword? But as those thoughts swirled in the minds of the majority, a burly god stood up. "I will give it a shot," he declared before descending on the platform and shooting toward the sword. Spurred by the words, 13 men rose in succession, and driven by their all-consuming thirst for the weapon, rushed toward it. Of those 14 gods, the weakest cultivation was at the void god rank, while the strongest reached the cosmic god rank. The cosmic god was the first to reach the sword, but he'd not even lifted his hand toward it that he felt his life and soul force dwindle at a startling pace. Alarmed, he turned heels, desperately trying to escape the sword's range, but to no avail. While cold sweat broke out on his forehead and his eyes widened in fright, the burly god turned into dust. Baffled by the sight, those ignorant deities attempted to make a getaway, but unfortunately for them, they'd stepped far too close. Aarg! Howling was the only right they held as the sword drained their life and soul force to the last bit, also turning them into dust. In the tribunes, the knowledgeable ridiculed their end. The few uninformed, however, saw their eyes widening in disbelief. Ignorant wastes. With this level of cultivation, they dare covet the god executing immortal sword? Laughable. Rajan scoffed. As far as he was concerned, the god executing immortal sword was a family heirloom. Only the titans were qualified to lay hands on it. Those devas and spirits simply didn't have the qualifications. Fellow deities, please don't be rash. Only legendary gods and above have enough strength to survive the sword's life-draining power. Even I can only admire it from afar. The Paragon's spirit ancestor warned from an unknown location, and his words dampened the spirits of all those willing to give it a shot. Joke. Following heaven's catastrophes, to say nothing of legendary gods, how many ancestral gods remained? For a moment, no deity dared make a move, and seeing this, those hidden firmament experts inwardly scoffed. The three realms truly are a den of low-breed monkeys. Was it really necessary for their excellencies to gather us all to handle one of their denizens? One of the three primordial gods under blood, Netherspanner, sneered as his crimson gaze swept the frightened deva and spirit gods. Nonsense. The gathered gods may be good-for-nothing fleas, but don't forget that the target's strength was enough to put down Sakra. Another one of the three primordial gods replied. However, his partner remained unconvinced. Humph, that Sakra is merely an overly favored upstart. How can he compare to a mortal bloodlord such as us? The irate primordial god denied his partner's words. As Bloodnether's cousins, those three enjoyed enormous prestige within the firmament. But even for them, firmament fruits were beyond reach. However, that Sakra, a man of such low upbringing, had not only received one, but wasted it at the early stage of the overgod rank. How hateful! If any one of them received it, they would now be peak-stage primordial gods. But as the irate primordial raged, the third chimed in. Their excellency's will is not what we can question. Unless you wish to follow in the footsteps of those that used their background to disturb the firmament's order, shut your mouth. Hearing this, the irate primordial recalled some disturbing past events and no longer dared open his mouth. At that time, a man rose from the tribunes and vanished to reappear before the stone altar. If the black hair and eyes weren't informative enough, the tyrannical air and red bindi mark on his forehead undoubtedly marked him as a titan. Chapter 544, The Last God of War Part 2. As Rajan appeared on the platform, the gathered deities rose in a stupor. A titan? Wasn't the titan domain wiped out? How can this be? Don't tell me the heaven-warding temple is hiding remnants. Though framed differently, those were the words swirling in the minds of the gathered deities. Stupor made way to fright, and the previous silence crumbled under an unprecedented uproar. Husband, where are you going? The conference is just starting. Starting my ass. My foolish wife. The heaven-warding temple is still concealing titans. When the Thonian primogen learns of this, in what scenario does he not bomb this place? If you want to die, die. Don't bring me down with you. A deva god exclaimed before kicking his way through the commotion and fleeing the scene. By the time his wife registered the words, he'd already crossed the sky and left the heaven-warding temple. Many others made a similar judgment call. However, driven by a stifling curiosity, others chose to remain. After all, throughout history, only the titans managed to raise the sword. Perhaps on this day, another one would give honor to his ancestors and become the god of war. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. How could they miss it? On the platform, Rajan ignored the commotion his appearance triggered to step toward the stone altar. From the start, his eyes had never left the sword, and as he stopped before its obsidian blade, unprecedented determination blazed in his gaze. Without hesitation, Rajan stretched his hand toward the sword and seized its handle. In that instant, the world surrounding him changed, becoming a vast land of darkness where only his body seemed magically illuminated. I give you 3 chances. Why do you want my strength? An ancient voice thundered from every corner of the dark land. And though at first startled by the sudden change of scenery, Rajan soon regained his composure. To avenge my people, he bellowed, pouring his blazing determination in every word. Alas, little did he expect the voice's next words to be insufficient. The word had barely echoed that Rajan felt his life force cut by 1/3. His eyes widened in disbelief, and cold sweat broke from his forehead. Why do you want my strength? Again, the voice asked, and again, Rajan sought in himself the purest reason driving him. To restore the Titan domain, he howled, but still failed to garner the sword's approval. Incorrect. The word shredded another 1/3 of Rajan's life force, and as he staggered and gasped for breath, the Titan didn't doubt that a 3rd failure would result in his death. Assailed by waves of frustration, he clenched his fists, digging through his palms and mined for an answer to his current plight. And again, the question echoed. Why do you want my strength? There was no more room for failure, and Rajan now reckoned that regardless of what the sword wished to hear, the right answer had nothing to do with his underlying aspirations. Closing his eyes, Rajan chose to make one last gamble and bellowed. To kill. Whoever bars my path, kill. Whoever shackles my growth, kill. Whoever harms my beloved, kill. Whoever I wish to kill, kill. I want your strength so that I may kill all. The words thundered with every bit of strength at Rajan's disposal, laced in every fiber of his soul's strength. But this time, a crushing silence followed, and as Rajan started to wonder if the sword was debating his fate, the voice again echoed. A lot of excess, but indeed, those were the words. Very well, I shall assist you. But make no mistake, from now on, your days are numbered. Even if you achieve transcendence, one day, I shall exhaust your life force. With those words, the dark world collapsed, and as the implications lingered in Rajan's mind, he reappeared before the sword with his hand still clutching the handle. But though he knew he would now have to give up eternal life, hesitation never flashed in his mind. So what if I must cast aside my eternal life? As long as I can avenge my world, all is worth it. Thonian Primogen, wash your neck, for henceforth. Rajan's grip around the handle tightened, and before the awestruck deities crowding the tribunes, he pulled the handle, wresting the sword free from the altar in one grating draw. As if awakening from untold years of stifling slumber, the god executing immortal sword grumbled, releasing a calamitous force that made all throughout the celestial world quiver in fright. Regardless of where they stood, none could evade the pressure of that calamitous force. And instantly, though his cultivation still stood at the peak of the legendary god rank, Rajan didn't doubt that with his current strength, one blow was enough to end an overgod's life. Strength, power, the right to slay all throughout the omniverse now lay in his hands. Ha 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 ha, ha 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 ha. Succeeded. Father, I succeeded. I am the 4th god of war. Waves of pride and elation consumed the Titan as the sword's might swelled his veins. Though his life force had been reduced by 2/3, the euphoria of the moment mitigated any weakness he should have felt. At that time, when even the primordials couldn't help but look at the sword in awe, a Yaksha man appeared on the platform with his amused eyes staring right at the sword. Before that sudden intrusion, the euphoric Rajan's face contorted into a frown. What? Is a little Deva, a void god at that, planning to snatch the god executing immortal sword from the god of war? Are you tired of living? Or do you think you can cash on my moment of weakness? Rajan sneered while resting the flat of the obsidian blade against his right shoulder. And as many thought that the Yaksha god didn't know how to cherish his life, his appearance changed, going from the Yaksha's short and bronze-skinned features to that of a 1.9 meters tall man whose Empyrean looks all new by heart. The icy blue eyes, the snow-white hair and translucent skin, that face. Before it, Rajan lost all manner of rationality and his eyes went bloodshot. Thonian Primogene. Rajan snarled, for indeed, the man was none other than his sworn enemy, Conrad. However, feeling the singular hatred of Rajan's gaze, Conrad arched an eyebrow. What do I know you? The 5 words slammed Rajan's chest like a 10,000 kilograms heavy sledgehammer, and for a second, his eyes widened in disbelief. You extinguished my world, took my mother, sisters, aunts, cousins, and wife captive, and you can't even recognize me? There was a palpable outrage in Rajan's tone. After all, his features were 80% similar to his father's, while his Titan mark should have said the rest. However, never did he expect Conrad's next words to be, "Sorry, taking mothers, sisters, aunts, cousins, and wives is something I do on a daily basis. If I had to remember all those men, it would never end." The words jabbed Rajan's sternum, and as he teetered, he almost dropped his sword. Soon, however, he regained his composure. "Ha ha 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 ha. Never mind. Thonian Primogene, you may disparage me, but I hold the sword. I am the god of war. Today, you can give up any thought of escaping. Surrender your life." Rajan bellowed and aimed the obsidian sword at Conrad. But as he prepared to make his move, he could feel the sword tremble as if overtaken by massive tremors. Sensing this, Rajan firmly believed the sword craved Conrad's blood. But seeing this, Conrad's lips curled into a smile. "God executing immortal, why do you only get naughtier with time? Come here," Conrad ordered, and as Rajan arched his arms for a swing, the sword broke free of his hands, smacked his face with the blades flat, and rushed toward Conrad. Rajan hadn't properly tumbled that the sword swirled around Conrad's neck in what looked like a euphoric dance. Before this mystifying scene, to say nothing of Rajan, there wasn't one deity on the scene that didn't blink in disbelief. What is the meaning of this? Rajan howled in grief, unable to accept this change of things. Chapter 545 Era of Diabolism. Rajan's grief-stricken howl thundered throughout the arena, awakening the dazed onlookers to the oddity of this scene. The god executing immortal sword had chosen a new master. A new god of war had appeared. But in the following second, the sword left its chosen to fawn on the master of diabolism. For the knowledgeable, night included, such a baffling occurrence required an immediate explanation. Otherwise, their common sense wouldn't survive it. Alas, as Conrad raised his hand, the sword didn't seem intent on explaining its reasoning. Without a sound, it dropped in his palm. Tightening his grip around the handle, Conrad rested his sword against his shoulder and cast an amused gaze at the aggrieved Rajan. "What did you answer?" Conrad leisurely asked. "To kill." Rajan directly replied, unable to see the problem in the words. But hearing this, Conrad couldn't prevent a snicker from escaping his lips. "Apologies, but that is my answer, not yours. For the truly chosen, all answers are correct. It is your will, not your words, that determines whether the sword approves of you or not." Conrad began, causing Rajan's eyes to widen in disbelief. "You mean to say, indeed, if the sword disapproves of you, persist. Stay true to your will, to your core aspiration, and exterminate any sliver of doubt in yourself. Only then are you qualified to wield it. In the past, I didn't delude myself into thinking I brandished the blade for some vain heroism. I picked the sword to kill. That was all." As those words echoed, Rajan finally realized his flaws. No wonders the sword first said insufficient. The first answer wasn't incorrect, but from the moment he wavered and opted for something else, he'd already failed. But why then did the sword still accept to lend him its aid? As if seeing through his thoughts, Conrad pursued. Of course, the quality of your answer only determines how much of its strength the sword will lend you. As for becoming its master, that is impossible. Whether you choose to imitate my answer or persist in your own, obtaining its assistance is as far as it goes. After all, the sword is bound to me in blood and soul. So long as I breathe, I am its master, the first, the last, the one true god of war. Conrad's words echoed in Rajan's mind like a thunderclap. His jaw dropped and his eyes went bloodshot. What a joke! To think that I counted on it to oppose you. What an absurd joke! Why? Why? I am not willing to accept this. Rajan growled his discontentment while rising from the ground. Thonian Primogen, you are the most depraved creature of all times, the ancestor of diabolism, the monster that keeps the vilest of villains on tiptoes. Why does the sword accept you as its master? Is it not the protector of the Titan race? Why? 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 The more he raged, the quicker Rajan fell to the madness assailing his mind. His eyes reddened further, and veins bulged all across his forehead. It's not fair. It's not fair. The grieving Titan souls demand justice. My house's women demand salvation. Not fair. Not fair. Where is righteousness? Where is justice? Where is retribution? I can't accept this. I can't. As his throaty howl boomed, Rajan leaped toward Cornad, baring his hands in a desperate move as his eyes teemed with madness. Alas, his move couldn't hamper Conrad's smile, and as his hands neared the profane prince's neck, they collapsed into gray ashes. Locked by a transcendental force, Rajan's body remained trapped mid-air, unable to advance or to retreat. Who decreed that monsters couldn't win the game? Who decreed that the fell couldn't triumph over the self-righteous? Who decreed that diabolism couldn't obliterate godhood? Conrad inquired as Rajan's arms and feet collapsed into gray ashes. I am the profane prince. In my world, devils reign and gods grovel. In my world, light surrenders and the Thonian governs. I am the profane prince, and so long as I stand, the justice of the fell shall stretch across eternity. Conrad declared and clenched his fist, causing the thrashing Rajan to vanish in dispersing gray ashes. Silence returned on the scene, a silence broken only by Conrad, who raised his sword toward heaven's sky. On this day, I, Conrad, Jade Emperor, Thonian Primogen, and Profane Prince raise my sword in defiance of vain hypocrisy, and announce that throughout the three realms, the era of diabolism officially begins. To whoever dreams of opposing my hegemony, give it your finest shot. Lifted by a surge of diabolic energies, the words grumbled within all deities' ears, forcing many down their seats as they quivered before this show of fell might. Some, however, showed no dread, and chief among them was a blood-haired woman clad in crimson armor. Stepping forward, the woman crossed space to appear above the arena before making her slow descent onto the platform. Her blood-red eyes stared right into Conrad's icy blue hues, never leaving them as she nimbly dropped 7 meters away from him. I oppose it, Blood Nether declared and stretched out her right hand, causing a crimson greatsword to appear in her grasp as her peak stage primordial goddess cultivation base exploded. Crack **, crack crack. Though untargeted by its pressure, the legions of deities felt their breath shorten, their heart rate shoot up, and their seats crumble beneath them. On the platform, the ground stretched with a flurry of cracks as Blood Nether aimed her sword at Conrad. Dragon Warden, Conrad, Profane Prince, the time has come for you to pay me just due. As she spoke, red light swirled around Blood Nether like ever-spinning tendrils, and across the arena, all could feel their life force dwindle, channeled by Blood Nether through her immortal blood spirit lineage. In the past, the immortal blood spirits, the Tao spirits, and the tribulation spirits were known as the three commanding lineages. Immortal blood spirits commanded life. Tao spirits the Tao, and tribulation spirits ruled various tribulations. With her lineage, Blood Nether not only possessed inestimable destructive power, but could effortlessly channel the bloodline strength and life force of those within the arena. Yet, facing her sword, Conrad only had one thing to say. "The only payment I owe you is my rod down your cunt." Chapter 546, God Executing Immortal AR. This time, Bloodnether didn't lose her composure. On the contrary, as she pictured the fate she envisioned for Conrad, she couldn't help but smirk. "I know that in your hands, the stability of the opponent's heart is a formidable tool. Therefore, I've been preparing against your venomous tongue. Try as you might, you won't achieve anything." Bloodnether replied. Alas, the words merely pulled a snicker from Conrad's lips. "Very well, show me what you got." As the words left his lips, Conrad lowered his sword to give Bloodnether full access to his body. Seeing him bare his openings for her to exploit, it would be a lie to say Bloodnether didn't feel incensed. However, believing this to be another one of his ploys, she kept her cool, adopted her battle stance, and freed her mind of all unnecessary thoughts. With her focus reaching the acme, blood-red flames burst from her form alongside the swirling tendrils of red light. Putting her weight on her left, Bloodnether stomped her foot and hurtled at Conrad. To the onlooker, even those hiding primordial gods, that move was akin to teleportation. But in Conrad's eyes, it couldn't be slower. Landing at Conrad's right, Bloodnether swung her greatsword at his neck, drawing a blood flame arc as her blade gashed the very fabric of space. Still, Conrad didn't budge. But as the blade neared his neck, it just kept moving forward, never reaching its target despite the infinitely small distance separating them. Instantly, Bloodnether's eyes widened in disbelief. Profound infiniteness in sight. She realized in a stupor and attempted to pull back her blade. Alas, the same process worked in reverse, and no matter how fast she was, her move just kept extending. But as she wrestled with that infinite loop, the space between Conrad and her compressed into a singular point that gathered all the energy and matter in the surroundings before spitting it out. A white hole opened, generating a dazzling blast that hit Bloodnether point blank, sending her hurtle in the sky before cratering on the ground. Pooh! As her armored back crashed on the ground, she spurted blood. The conceit of ancient rulers is indeed astounding. "Do you think I need my sword for you? Bloodnether, you are nothing more than a dish I out to consume, painstakingly flavored to my taste due to your innate deficiencies. If not for your high cultivation, do you think I would waste that much time on you? Delusional flea, know your place." Conrad scoffed with his head tilted against the flat of his sword, and for a second, silence reigned in the tribunes. To say nothing of those primordial gods, even Knight found the scene hard to process. There is more to it than profound infiniteness. With that alone, he can't possibly overpower Bloodnether. Did his cultivation already reach primordial level? Knight couldn't help but wonder. But as Bloodnether rose from the debris, revealing a wholly unharmed form, his attention shifted toward her. Immortal blood spirits possessed a vitality that rivaled that of Thonian devils. All their wounds instantly restored, not even needing a breath of time. At Bloodnether's level, depending on bloodline strength alone, even if split into 10,000 pieces, she could instantly remold herself. Better, her soul was sheltered by regretless supreme will. Even for Conrad, harming her was no mean feat. Moreover, she still had that tool. Without a word, Bloodnether stretched out her hand, causing a translucent, an emerald and a black gate to appear at her back. Her 3 transcendent gates. The gates opened, causing similarly colored rivers to unfurl, permeating the atmosphere as they surrounded Conrad. "Dragon Warden, I must admit that in this life, you've outpaced all my expectations. However, if you think victory already lays in your hands, you're the delusional one." Bloodnether declared and raised her left hand, causing black chains to appear around her wrist and shoot toward Conrad. By the time the 3 rivers trapped him in a maelstrom, coated in blood mist. The chains were cleaving their way toward him. From those chains, Conrad could feel an unprecedented force that left the primordial level far behind. An all-dominating energy able to bend all deities to its whims. A supreme will. A false supreme artifact, Conrad realized as the chains blended with the three rivers to entrap him. From Blood Nether's memories, he knew that for the sake of restraining the god-executing immortal sword, Regretless used his high supreme will to create a suppressing artifact. Because on the one hand, Knight assisted him in the refining with his nothingness insight, while on the other hand, he was his most trusted official. Regretless granted him the artifact. In preparation for this battle, Knight lent it to Blood Nether. Never did he expect that before Conrad put the sword to use, Blood Nether would have to unleash the artifact. Only an almighty supreme could possibly refine a supreme artifact. Even a high supreme such as Regretless didn't have the qualifications. Therefore, the chains didn't have true supremacy. Still, with those chains in hand, Blood Nether had the qualifications to trade blows with a supreme. Yet, even as the chains morphed into a blood cage, Conrad remained unfazed. This time, he clutched his sword, shifting it in an oblique stance as he shut his eyes close. In that instant, man and sword became one, beating on the same tune as the noose formed by the transcendental maelstrom and Blood Nether's false supreme. Chains tightened around Conrad. Black mist surged from his body, dancing like tendrils of darkness as his feet sank in the ground, and the god-executing immortal sword screeched against the waves. God-executing immortal art, first form, omnidimensional slash, Conrad whispered, and whirled as he raised his sword in a horizontal slash. There was no dazzling sword light, no fantastical phenomenon, only the sound of a sword hacking through all corners of space, through all angles, through all things. Slash. With that one slash, the maelstrom was minced into drizzle that noiselessly tumbled onto the ground. The blood cage collapsed, the chains snapped, tumbling alongside the drizzle before an awestruck Blood Nether. Crack. A single sound, and Blood Nether's primordial armor, the immortal blood race's heirloom, split in infinitely small particles, becoming red metallic dust that crumbled onto the ground. But if in another location, the exposition of her nakedness would have driven Blood Nether mad with rage, this time she didn't have the luxury. Thud. Though outwardly unharmed, Blood Nether dropped on her knees, her eyes wide open, and fresh blood unceasingly trickling down her orifices. What a splendid sword! Blood Nether stammered as she felt her bones and internal organs shredded to pieces without any means of recovery. Her eyes glazed, and she collapsed on the floor. With a casual hand wave, Conrad took her into his infinite void space. One move. It only took one move. Chapter 547 Nothingness Seal. Again, from the Brahmas to their legions of guests, from the primordials to Night, all held their breath. Blood Nether's final move was a force even Supremes would have to take seriously, a force that none on the scene could resist with confidence. Night was no exception. However, before such a force, a single slash of Conrad's sword was more than enough to crush all offensives and even destroy a false supreme artifact animated by regretless will. Faced with such a result, Knight was forced to admit that his best estimations didn't come close to a fair assessment of Conrad's current strength. The past Dragon Warden couldn't survive a single blow. Uncle Highest Dragon, the past Dragon Warden, the past Celestial Slaughter, and even the past Regretless. None of them can compare. In this world, Regretless and the Dharma Lord aside, who can challenge him? By trying to groom a sacrificial pig, we've raised a savage beast whose hide our thickest spears can no longer dent. How laughable. Knight remarked and stepped forward. As he did, his voice rumbled in the dazed immortal blood and eternal night guards. There is no time to waste. I will activate the formation. Coordinate with me to seal the profane prince within nothingness. If the operation is successful, all of you shall be rewarded with firmament fruits. Knight proclaimed, making the experts snap out of their torpor as he trod the sky, stopping 50 meters above Conrad. Knight didn't waste time in idle words and stretched out his hands, causing pitch-black seals to rise from all corners of the heaven-warding temple alongside swirling black energy chains. 600 experts emerged from the tribunes, surrounding Conrad from all sides. The weakest among those showed an early stage over-god cultivation base, while the strongest stood at the primordial god rank. The energies of those gathered deities intertwined in an intricate whirlpool, feeding the formation while a black vortex appeared at the base of Conrad's feet and swallowed him within. Instantly, the scenery around Conrad changed, and he appeared in a pitch-black world whose temperature reached absolute zero. In that world of eternal darkness, all extrasensory abilities lost use. The five senses became worthless, and the very emotional spectrum suffered silent attacks. This was a world where time didn't fluctuate, a world with neither past nor future, a nothingness seal. Better, from the outside, all four transcendental laws coordinated to suppress Conrad's possible law attempts, forcing him to forego making use of his triple transcendence to reverse the nothingness. Seeing this, even as his emotions sank under the pressure of nothingness, Conrad curved his lips into a smile, then did the only reasonable thing the situation required. He drove his sword in a sweeping, slanted slash, God executing immortal art, second form, infinite murdering. Though it seemed Conrad's blade only swept once, as the endless power of infiniteness rippled within, the blade hacked at the very fabrics of that world trillions of times. In fact, the word trillions was entirely inaccurate as the zillions of instantaneous sword slashes approached ever closer to infinity. Trillions upon trillions of dimensional sword slashes tore the veils of the nothingness seal, shredding open a door back to the celestial world. And as soon as the first gap occurred, the nothingness collapsed, bringing alongside it this pitch-black world that shattered in trillions of pieces. Unscathed, Conrad reappeared in the arena, this time facing Knight who'd not expected his finest work to collapse with such ease. "You truly are a freak," Knight remarked without an emotional ripple. With the seal's failure, he now had no other choice but to confront Conrad with military strength, a move even he found unwise. But then again, what other choice did he have? Clenching his fists, Knight closed his eyes, causing 8 additional pairs of arms to grow from his sides, while the diamond-shaped red mark on his forehead glittered with horrendous destructive might. "I will handle the vanguard. Support me with ranged attacks." Knight ordered the 2 battalions and vanished from sight. The following second, he reappeared, but this time, Conrad wasn't startled to see that Knight stood at millions of spots at the same time. Visible yet invisible, tangible yet intangible. Highest Dragon's shifting void step was an imitation of Nothingness Master's quasi-omnipresence. Naturally, with his profound nothingness insight, Knight could achieve the same result. But so what? With his sword in hand, there was nothing Conrad couldn't slash. Knight raised his hands, causing myriads of black holes to fill the sky, each pulling at Conrad with irresistible suction force. Faced with such pressure, even Conrad's unparalleled physique was put to trial. Worse, from the back, the 300 immortal blood guards and 300 eternal night guards rained a flurry of ranged attacks on him. Blood red and dark blue energy beams locked Conrad from all sides alongside a grand variety of unique arts. The moves bypassed Knight, who in his intangible state feared none of them, to carry on toward Conrad. Still, Conrad didn't waver. 27 locks appeared around his form, swirling around him as the myriad blows approached. In one ringing sound, the 27 locks blocked all the blows and sent them hurtling back at their sender with 100 times the might. But as those deities readied to join hands in a counter, Conrad's lips curved into a fiendish grin, and 25 other black locks joined the fray. From those locks, tremendous negation force rippled, and when the 52 locks intertwined, their might increased several folds. Negation. With a word, Conrad negated those deities' reaction abilities, and they watched idle as their strongest blows slammed them with a force they couldn't achieve in 100 lifetimes. Boom boom boom. Aerarg. Barreled by the irresistible force, the 600 guards recoiled, with the overgods directly bursting into blood fog, obliterated in body and soul, leaving behind only the 6 primordial gods. Negation. Again, the word left Conrad's lips, and Knight's black holes vanished as if they never existed. Negation. Knight's false omnipresence collapsed, and he reappeared in flesh and blood, within a single spot. As a profound nothingness master, Knight also possessed potent negation abilities. However, his were limited to physical aspects and the emotional spectrum. Never had he seen such an absolute negation force. Worse, the intertwining of those 52 locks created a pressure that rivaled a true supreme. Alas, Conrad was merely getting started. Anti-Godhead. Terrible diabolic forces exploded from Conrad's form and coalesced in a veil of darkness. The veil morphed, becoming a 3 kilometers tall head rippling with fiendish might. And though nigh identical to Conrad's, the onlookers found no appeal in that horrifying head. The anti-Godhead opened its mouth, causing the 6 primordial gods to lose control of their bodies and fly toward it. Aoarg. They howled in grief, but grief wrought no change, and the anti-Godhead munched them into pieces before refining the energies they wrought and transferring it to Conrad. Facing such a force, Knight knew he only had one thing left to do. To cherish, you must breathe. To defend, you must live. Eldest brother, I am incompetent and have no other recourse. Knight whispered as he readied to take the last step and reach sublime nothingness insight, thereby becoming supreme. At that time, in the firmament, Cloud heaved a sigh. If I stay idle, the world has nothing to do with me. But the price of this idleness is ultimately acrid. Cloud whispered, opened his eyes, and rose from the ground. But as he did, the acme of death laws burst from his form, shooting toward the firmament sky in one black column that marked his death transcendence. Cloud stepped forward, and with that step, his 4 transcendent gates appeared at his back, merging to become one from which the forces of life, death, truth, and fate combined to become a supreme will. With that step, Cloud's cultivation left the ranks of deities, the ranks of transcendent beings, to become the Omniverse Third Supreme. Another step followed, and Cloud left the firmament, crossing the entirety of the Omniverse to land within the celestial world. The ability to cross all dimensions with but a step, another supreme skill. With Cloud's appearance, the anti-Godhead's pressure on Knight dropped at a rapid pace, and all raised their eyes to stare at the new entrant. Conrad, long time no see. Apologies, but before harming my little brother, you must first ask my permission. Cloud declared and raised his hand, causing his all-transcendence to erupt in a flash of swirling white, emerald, black, and translucent forces, all aimed at Conrad. Chapter 548, Clash of Titans. Of all the forces Conrad had ever collided with, in terms of sheer size and shape, the thin, multicolor ray conjured by Cloud undoubtedly wasn't anything extraordinary. However, Conrad didn't doubt that, regretless aside, he'd never felt anything more threatening. Although only one law separated triple transcendence from all transcendence, a horrendous strength gap divided those 2 stages. For the all-transcendent Cloud, 100 blood nether were not enough to break a sweat. Still, before this seemingly irresistible force, Conrad's lips curled into a smile. Very well, Cloud, my cheaply gained sworn brother. Let's see how much of my strength you're worth. Conrad stated and raised his left hand. The diabolic energies gathered by the anti-Godhead swelled the forbidden physique's locks. Conrad focused it all in the absolute negation physique, making it successively break 2 locks, while his myriad world immortal blood digested the lineages of those fallen experts. 27 locks for the might reversal physique, 27 for the absolute negation physique. A total of 54 forbidden locks now swirled around Conrad's form, intertwining and overlapping to form a brand new force. The three forbidden physiques might be three entirely different forces, but just like the supreme principles overlapped, they were destined to merge and become one. Depending on those 54 locks alone, Conrad didn't fear any supreme. Undaunted, he stretched out his left finger, causing his 54 locks to form a black barrier that met Cloud's incoming ray in a resounding blast. Boom! The reversal barrier swallowed the force in its entirety, then sent it back at Cloud with 100 times the might. But unlike Conrad's previous foes, when faced with this reversed force, Cloud's lips curled into a smile. "Dispel?" Cloud commanded, and the ray collapsed in light particles. "Apologies, but attempting to turn my supreme will against me is a fool's errand," Cloud stated, and his hands flashed in incantation gestures. The light particles expanded and morphed into 4 transcendental tiger beasts. The beasts merged into one, becoming a 50 kilometers tall, multicolored tiger whose slit eyes and bloodthirst daggered Conrad. Ruer. Star. The tiger's soul-rending roar tore through the very fabrics of the celestial realm. But this merely was the beginning. At Cloud's back, 4 pairs of wings, each for truth, life, death, and fate, appeared while around his form, the full might of his all-transcendence billowed in swirling clouds. With a step, Cloud vanished and reappeared on top of his all-transcendent tiger, staring down at Conrad from that impossibly high altitude. "Conrad, I deny your life," Cloud exclaimed, and with those 5 simple words, released an irresistible force that made the life-transcendent Conrad lose control of his life force. For the first time in centuries, Conrad could feel the very essence of his life under an immediate threat. However, Cloud was only getting started. "I deny your truth. I deny your fate." With those 2 supreme commands, Conrad could now feel his fate standard crackle while the truth of his existence fell to jeopardy. Although the Devil Bridge granted him absolute immortality, if he couldn't stop Cloud's following move, he didn't doubt he would spend the upcoming decades thriving on diabolic energies to remold his flesh and soul. "And command your death." "Existence denial," Cloud proclaimed, causing Conrad's body to fall into an illusory state as his life, truth, fate, and death submitted to Cloud's all-transcendent control. Though Conrad possessed a total of 54 forbidden locks, Cloud didn't believe it would be enough to revert his move. After all, Conrad hadn't reached 30 in either. Although it was just a matter of a few locks, those made all the difference between non-supreme, supreme, and high supreme battle power. However, as Conrad's smile broadened, he was forced to admit he'd underestimated what 54 could accomplish. Negation. With that one word, Conrad negated all of Cloud's supreme commands, and from illusory, his body returned to its previous state. "Try harder," Conrad chided, and instantly, Cloud's face contorted into a frown. "This isn't going to be easy," Cloud realized, and chose to go all out. Nearby, Knight no longer hesitated and made his move. Closing his eyes, he dived into his emotional spectrum and destroyed the last thing, preventing him from reaching sublime nothingness in sight. Familial love. As soon as he did, the bright celestial sky darkened, falling into an abrupt night whose darkness stretched to the entirety of the celestial realm. When Knight again opened his eyes, a unique will swirled within, announcing to the world that he'd officially left the ranks of mere cultivators and deities to become supreme. Sensing this change, Cloud's mood sank, and he closed his eyes to sigh his helplessness. However, that change only lasted for a blink of an eyelid. "What's done is done. Knight, with me," Cloud ordered as his eyes opened wide, and Knight vanished to reappear beside him. A pitch-black veil swirled around his form, while the deadening forces of his supreme will rippled unceasingly. The profane prince's existence endangers the balance of the omniverse. Exterminating him and his devil road is the only rational choice, Knight stated, and as his words echoed, His body expanded, going from 188 meters to 30 kilometers. More like it endangers our survival. Cloud followed, and he too expanded to a full-blown 30 kilometers. But that was only one part of the transformation. The immemorial Titan brothers both boasted 9 heads and 18 arms, each rippling with the might of their supreme will. Now, Conrad didn't merely confront one, but 2 supremes. Still, he showed no fear, cracking his neck as his form rose through the sky to merge with his anti-godhead. The anti-godhead morphed, becoming a 30 kilometers tall giant of black energies with 50 heads and 100 arms. "I suppose it is time I have you face the might of my blood," Conrad declared, and let the full strength of his quasi-firmament blood explode, releasing a horrendous pressure that made even those supreme recoil. And though Knight could no longer feel apprehension, his instincts and logic told him that in the upcoming clash, the tiniest mistake could result in their demise. The brothers exchanged a glance of tacit understanding and, like meteors, hurtled at Conrad. This time, Knight showcased true omnipresence, able to strike from billions of spots at the same time. Conrad's negation abilities could also not so easily affect him. Cloud's every punch exploded with all transcendence, making their individual might defy the understanding of mere deities. The onlookers no longer had anything to say, and all throughout the 3 realms stared in awe at this one in a trillion years clash. Conrad raised his sword, meeting every single one of the Supreme's offensive with a single sword slash, and though it seemed their relentless offensives would ultimately get the best of him, he stood as firm as a mountain, never recoiling from even one step as he swept his sword like the incarnation of slaughter. Boom, boom, boom. Every collision was like a thunderclap, with both sides unleashing a myriad of abilities. But while Knight and Cloud's combined forces and mutual understanding allowed them to bring the best out of one another, Conrad won with a mixture of superior power and unbreakable abilities. The combination of his might reversal and absolute negation physique was such a hacks that even those Supremes didn't know how to dent him. They could only trade blows after blows while staying alert for an opening. It never came. Conrad, however, chose to create his innate skill, myriad world explosion. Conrad bellowed, causing all the offensive abilities, ancestral glories, and various innate skills of all his underlying bloodlines to fill the sky like miniature planets. Cloud and Knight watched in awe as this unprecedented flurry of bloodline abilities swelled infinitely. Worse, auspicious clouds trapped them in a unique dimension, preventing all escape. Instantly, Knight attempted to nullify the abilities through his nothingness insight, while Cloud used the truth aspect of his all-transcendence to erase them. But when faced with Conrad's negation wall, they both failed. Swelled by the endless power of the myriad world immortal blood and Conrad's infiniteness insight, the myriad of abilities reached an unprecedented level of destructive power and detonated. Boom! A horrendous kaleidoscopic blast hit Cloud and Knight point blank, sending them flying backward with torn bones, seared flesh, and erupting blood. At that time, heavens will awoke. Chapter 549, Highest DG. Meanwhile, as the 3 realms' fate was being decided by a single battle, within the infernal realm, Hell's will still grumbled, unleashing relenting waves of infernal tribulations on Hell and retribution for its law enforcer's fall. But though the devils occupying the central domain had long since grown accustomed to it, for those low-level demons, fiends, and humans, it was another story. Of course, on this particular day, none cared for Hell's wrath. Projection mirrors stretched throughout the infernal realm, observing the mind-blowing battle, tying the profane prince with those firmament experts. Although they couldn't join the fun, Hell's deities were long prepared to watch it from afar. Therefore, they'd not missed anything. Within the central domain's sovereign palace, the Overlord's former residents, Yvonne, Else, Gulistan, Kron, Elia, and Helmet stared, through a truth projection screen, at Conrad's epic battle. Though none doubted Conrad's ability to squash his foes, at the end of the day, those were supremes. If nothing else, the battle was a learning opportunity for them all. And should anything go awry, they stood ready to intervene. But as the battle went on, and Conrad's superiority became evident, they all relaxed, ready to enjoy it to the end. However, as the battle reached a critical point, they felt a strange smell coming from the adjacent hall, the smell of cooking. By itself, there was nothing wrong with that smell. However, the timing was entirely ridiculous. The location also didn't match. Worse, as the smell intensified, they couldn't feel the presence of the one driving this operation. Elia, Helmet, stay here. Else, Gulistan, stand ready. Kron, come with me. Yvonne ordered and stood up, vanishing alongside Kron to appear in the adjacent room. Never did she expect that there, she would find a supremely handsome man with features 80% similar to Conrad's, dressed in an apron and marinating sliced chicken parts in an exotic sauce. On the side, a sauce and sides boiled, releasing the aroma that pulled Yvonne there. Talroth? Yvonne stammered the name, unable to believe her eyes. This time, even Kron was left slack-jawed, unable to fathom how and why the former southern king of hell, a stately demon king, was turning their hall into a kitchen and cooking with rapt attention. Oh, greetings, daughter-in-law. Apologies for the intrusion. I merely wish to give you all a surprise. Talroth began without shifting his focus from his cooking tasks. Kron and Yvonne both blinked in disbelief, not knowing how to process this scene. You cook? Again, Yvonne stammered, speaking as if the two words were the world's greatest absurdity. Talroth merely nodded in approval. But of course, I love cooking. Soothes the mind and liberates the heart. I used to cook for every single one of my consorts at least once a year, more depending on their rank. Asmodeus got 4 Taurith-made meals per year. You'd be surprised by how their eyes sparkle as my hands go through the ingredients. Talroth replied in such a natural, relaxed tone that Yvonne almost believed herself in the wrong for thinking that beneath him. But you donated them all to your son, all to buy yourself time? She countered, obviously seeing through Tauritha's previous move. And indeed, she was right. Ah, the necessities of plotting. Talroth didn't deny it. Why did he donate all his consorts except Asmodeus? For impression. By donating his consorts, by taking that humiliating steps, he was telling the world that he surrendered to Conrad's might and knew himself unable to challenge his will. However, going too far was as bad as not going far enough. If he truly gave them all up, Conrad would have been too suspicious of how the Demon King could so easily give up his prized possession. Therefore, he had to keep Asmodeus, the one whose value eclipsed all the others combined, and through that tell Conrad that there still was someone he couldn't give up. In truth, he couldn't care less. An eternity of sexual dominion had long grown stale, though hearing those women writhe under his hands still wrought some delight. As the years wore on, cooking became a stabler, more reliable source of mental relief. A simple, appreciable routine. But knowing that in the future, even that would lose meaning, Talroth couldn't help but sigh. Regaining her composure, Yvonne cast an intense gaze at Talroth. Why are you here? She directly asked, knowing that regardless of Tauritha's purpose, it couldn't bring them any good. To pass time. The chapter of the 3 realms is approaching its end, and with it, so does my life. I wish for one last humane conversation before making my final move. Talroth replied, speaking with a sincerity that few could doubt. Yvonne did. That's simple. That's simple. Tell me, daughter-in-law, what's the highest single digit? Talroth asked as he pushed the sliced meat parts into a self-made oven. Hearing this, Yvonne's face contorted in a frown. Clearly, the answer was 9. But if it were that simple, how could Talroth ask it? This wasn't about numerical digits at all. For an instant, Yvonne closed her eyes, reminiscing a discussion she had with Conrad many years ago. 3. Her eyes opened wide, and she gave that odd reply. Unexpectedly, Talroth nodded in vigorous approval. Well said. My crown prince did choose an outstanding wife. Indeed, 3 is the highest. Everything revolves around 3. 9 is the largest single digit, but it still takes 3. Therefore 9 is inferior. I love 3 and all the games revolving around it. Talroth followed in a speech that made Yvonne's eyes narrow further. But following that logic, isn't 1 the highest? She countered. Of course not. 1 is the start, the origin, the beginning and finality. Alone it is worth so little. How could it be the highest? Talroth replied, and unbeknown to Yvonne, his lips curved into a grin. At that time, Conrad's myriad world explosion blasted night and cloud, awakening heaven's will and bringing the battle to the final stage. As if sensing this, Talroth waved his hand, causing an hourglass to appear beside his oven. I dislike using such tricks during my cooking session, but time is of the essence. It will all be ready when the last bit of sand drops. I truly hope you will enjoy it. Farewell. Talroth stated and vanished from the scene. Meanwhile, within the heaven-warding temple, the appearance of heavens will sent the world into chaos. Heavenly tribulation dropped in a deluge of pure white lightning bolts, all targeting Conrad. When primogens died or lost their blood origins, the parts of heavens or hells will within them automatically return to their original owner. Of the past Deva primogens, only Daksha and Chandra were still alive. And of the 2, Daksha alone retained his blood origin. Having regained most of the scattered force, heavens could unleash a dreadful tribulation. Alas, its power alone was nothing before Conrad's nefarious might. Innate skill, devouring? Conrad exclaimed and opened his mouth, swallowing all heavenly tribulation in one go. His eyes then shifted toward the tumbling night and cloud. God executing immortal art, final form, extermination anima. Conrad bellowed, became one with the god executing immortal sword, and turned into a massive black veil. The veil morphed, becoming a gargantuan lion of oppressive darkness. From that lion's glowing red eyes, soul-rending extermination will rippled, making all that glanced at it shiver in fright. *Ruer. Star. The lion roared, destroying all of night and cloud's lingering forces with absolute might, and shredding them body and soul. Before that casual roar, even before the lion bared its fangs and claws, the 2 collapsed in utter defeat. Conrad then shifted his eyes toward the sky, challenging heaven's will with his glowing hues. In that form, he flew toward the heavens and bared his fangs. Innate skill, devouring? Conrad bellowed, not even bothering using the underworld strength. Before his current devouring abilities, heaven's will was but a lamb awaiting slaughter. A white, blinding orb appeared in the sky, and unable to resist, that orb dropped in Conrad's maw, merging with his Thonian will. Conrad's appearance changed, returning to his human shape, and as his Thonian will devoured heaven's will, as he claimed sovereignty of the celestial realm and mastered the fate of all its denizens, he closed his eyes, letting the might of his fate laws skyrocket, defying their current limit to reach the true acme. A white light column tore through the celestial sky, announcing to the world the achievement of Conrad's 4th transcendence. Alongside it, the other primal laws merged in all transcendence and Conrad's supreme will condensed. Henceforth, he could also say the 3 words, I am supreme. Chapter 550 Taurtha's Demise. If the unrivaled surge of energy released by Conrad's supreme will was enough to put all realms in awe, it was but a part of his transformation. With the integration of heaven's will, 2 other locks broke. One for the absolute negation physique, one for the might reversal physique. With 29 broken locks separately, Conrad's physiques individually stood a step away from supremacy. But when their strength overlapped, high supremes aside, he could flatten everything. The shackles of his bloodline further lessened, and Conrad didn't doubt that so long as he absorbed Hell's will, the long-awaited breakthrough would open its doors to him. With a smile, Conrad waved his hand, pulling the strands of heaven's will within the warden and Daksha back into his Thonian will. His eyes then lowered toward Night and Cloud, who lay vanquished on the ground. As a nothingness supreme, Night was relatively indestructible. The only way for Conrad to dispose of him was to sacrifice the god-executing immortal sword. But with his current level of broken locks, Conrad could just negate his nothingness. As for Cloud, some negation or a sword slash could erase his supreme existence. However, this wasn't the time. Following his assumptions, Conrad firmly believed that the lives of those two would be of capital importance in the following hours. Unbeknown to the onlookers, he negated some of their injuries, calculating the time it would take for them to awake. Regretless, "Don't disappoint me," Conrad whispered as he turned to face the infernal realm. His consorts, dukes, and secret forces appeared from the shadows, lining up beside and behind him. All stared at the infernal realm, which now experienced startling changes. Following his departure from the central domain, Talroth first reappeared in the miniature world where he kept Asmodeus trapped and stepped toward her. Seeing him, expecting and not in the mood for his usual snides, Asmodeus closed her eyes, keeping her face lowered toward the ground. Before that sight, Talrotha's lips curled into a smile. "It is a pity that between the two of us, it has come to this," Talroth began, speaking such out-of-character words that Asmodeus' eyes opened and narrowed at him. "What do you mean by that? Or perhaps you've finally decided to put me out of my misery?" she directly asked, knowing that as far as Talroth was concerned, the best she could expect was a sordid fate. However, Talroth shook his head and sat on the cold ground beside her. His back leaned against the pillar she remained tied on, but his face tilted to the left, still keeping her in sight. "Not quite, though I suppose this is still a farewell." As those words left Talrotha's lips, confusion gripped Asmodeus' mind, and her peerless face contorted into a frown. "There are words all will speak at least once in their lives, words I never had any use for. But since this is our final meeting, and I will never again have the opportunity, I ought to say them," Talroth pursued, and with a smile, stretched his left hand toward Asmodeus, stroking her cheek with a tenderness she'd long forgotten. "Sorry, and thank you. Sorry for wronging you not once, but twice, for never being able to be the one you yearned for, for giving you hope when I knew I meant to squash your heart. And thank you for following me across all those eras, for having always been my wife. Fate is a cruel mistress. Even I couldn't anticipate it would again set us on this path. I could say that in another life, I wish things were different. And perhaps I do. Perhaps like all the rest, I somehow wish to experience genuineness. However," there, Talroth paused, staring deep into Asmodeus' confused eyes while still stroking her cheek. His smile vanished, and while pulling back his hand, he stood up. "That would be a lie. My destiny is that of supreme power. In my heart, nothing else matters. In my eyes of shifting gray, that alone maintains its brightness. My name shall awe all things across eternity. For I, only I, am qualified to wear the crown of eternal dominion." As the words echoed in Asmodeus' mind, Talroth vanished in a cold, deadening force that chilled her to the bones. As Talroth reappeared, he now stood above Hell's tallest mountain, staring at the dropping infernal tribulations with a mildly apologetic gaze. The death of every primogen returns their portion of the will back to the origin. But little do they know that while the others combined only hold 1/15, the Overlord and I both hold 1/3. Hell, I must say that as a parent, you've treated me very well. What a pity that unfilial piety is my first virtue." Talroth whispered and stretched his hands while staring straight into the deluge of red lightning bolts. "Farewell?" Crack. Following that word, Talrotha's skin crackled with fissures spreading all around his previously flawless body. Dark purple flames burst from the fissures, setting the incubus primogen ablaze with infernal flames. Though he made no sound, the flames seared Talrotha's flesh, and from the extremities to the trunk, burned him to ashes. 5 seconds was all it took for Tauroth to become dispersing ashes. From his body and soul, nothing remained. The portion of Hell's will within him returned to its rightful owner, and as Hell's will mourned the loss of its most cherished child, its infernal tribulations skyrocketed in might, releasing such a dreadful force that the devil formation showed signs of shattering. The deluge of red lightning turned into a crimson lightning tiger that hurtled at the barrier and slammed right into it. The barrier collapsed, leaving the denizens of Hell powerless before the will's wrath. At that time, Conrad made his move and unleashed the yellow springs of the underworld. The springs coalesced into a gigantic maw that rushed into the infernal realm to swallow the tumbling tiger. And as the will's wrath still grumbled in waves of horrendous might, the underworld maw rushed into the reddened sky and merged with it. The sky's color changed, becoming a dark yellow as the will thrashed against the underworld's consumption. All to no avail. Hi-yi-ite thigh-it. The grating cry of Hell's will pierced trillions of ears as it collapsed and became the final meal of Conrad's Thonian will. The last shackles broke, with Conrad's broken locks finally reaching 30 in both the absolute negation and might reversal physique. Better, his bloodline reached firmament level. Still, Conrad couldn't relish, for a scene that none expected now occurred in the infernal sky. A golden gate appeared, surrounded by a majestic swirl of auspicious clouds that danced as if to announce the coming of the world's true sovereign. The gate opened, and in the blinding golden light bursting from its doors, 2 figures appeared. One that needed no introduction, one all recognized as that of Tauroth, while at his left, a 6 or 7 years old boy stood with bright, slit golden eyes and gray hair. Tauroth held the boy's hands as the two walked out of the golden gate. But that merely was the beginning. From within the firmament, the Dharma Lord that should have been trapped by Regretless remolded his body, vanished into nothingness, and reappeared in the infernal realm's sky. As he stood at Taurotha's right, his stance needed no explanation. The Dharma Lord waved his hand, and above the three, a jade crown appeared, rippling with the very power of samsara. Chapter 551 The Supreme Conqueror. If the reappearance of Tauroth, the Dragon Boy, and the sudden manifestation of the Dharma Lord should have filled Conrad with confusion, it was the jade crown hovering above the three that gripped his attention. Within that crown, a palpable supreme will rippled, announcing to the world that this tiny crown was indeed a supreme artifact. But that alone wasn't unacceptable. The truly sordid fact was the power of samsara rippling from it. A force able to control incarnations and reincarnations swirled around that crown, making even Conrad stand with vigilance. Only true bridge owners could resist the power of samsara, for only they crossed the 10,000 tribulations. All others faced an immediate threat. At that time, Night and Cloud awoke, and alongside Moon, stared dumbstruck at the Dharma Lord. What is the meaning of this? They couldn't help but ask. That the Dharma Lord could escape Regretless suppression wasn't inconceivable. After all, Regretless had been in torpor for centuries. As a nothingness supreme, the escape means at the Dharma Lord's disposal were innumerable. But why did he stand beside Tauroth and worse, that boy? But as their minds swirled, an outlandish scene occurred. Before the onlooker's gaze, the forms of the Dharma Lord and the Empyrean Dragon Boy blurred, becoming immaterial and generating a strange, unnameable force as infinite power surged from Taurotha's form. But this merely was the start. Across various realms and worlds, tens of thousands of light rays emerged, shooting toward the jade crown now firmly standing above Tauroth. From the infinite void space where Conrad kept Sakra sealed, his soul emerged in a light ray and rushed toward the crown. From the miniature world where Tauroth kept Asmodeus trapped, she emerged, turned into a bright ray as she shot toward the crown. Somewhere within the Myriad Dreams Valley, Malcolm, who handled petty chores, turned into a bright ray and shot toward the crown. At Conrad's right, Cassilia's eyes contorted into a frown, and as she quivered, she too turned into a white ray, threatening to join the rest in the crown. At that time, Conrad stretched out his left palm, using the power of negation and his lordship of the three realms to suppress Caecilia's departure. However, even with those forces, the crown's samsara controlling power proved a dreadful challenge. It was as if that force stood beyond the lordship of any realm, unable to be curbed just because of Conrad's realm dominion. Negation. Conrad snarled, pushing the power of his 60 locks to limits and releasing high supreme level force for the first time in his life. Only then did Caecilia's absorption end, and she fell back to his side. However, her eyes now seemed groggy, and her appearance experienced fluctuating changes, intertwining between her current black hair and icy blue eyes and a pair of silver hair and eyes that Conrad knew all too well. But as Conrad suppressed Caecilia's change, the others didn't have the same luck and merged with the crown. However, if that scene should have held them in awe, it was the collapsing form of the Dharma Lord and Empyrean Dragon Boy that befuddled night, moon, and cloud. But as a flurry of emotions preventing the other two from thinking clearly, Night saw through that force. A time paradox. No time paradoxes. Night realized, speaking words that unleashed mighty waves in the other two as they too realized the ploy. Played. They'd been played from the start, and as the siblings put two and two together, seeing his worst assumption become reality, Conrad's face contorted into a frown. And so the truth is revealed. Their preparations even exceeded all I expected. While all focused on Celestial Slaughter's return, they failed to realize that from the start, the true mastermind still hid in the shadows. 3 existences separated by 3 timelines, unable to stand beside one another due to time paradoxes. For them, 3 stem from the same root. Conrad spat, awakening all on the scene to the ludicrous play unfolding beneath their gazes. They are not clones. They're not bound. All are unique individuals. In the days of the Empyrean's hegemony, the Dharma Lord was the past, Celestial Slaughter was the present, and Tauroth, the future. But in this timeline, Tauroth is the present, the Dharma Lord is the past, and Celestial Slaughter the future. When the 3 stand beside one another, time paradoxes kick in, making past and future collapse and merge with the present. The power of time paradoxes was something none could fully explain, a force that even Supremes trod carefully with. By having the nerve to base his plan on such a trick, the Dharma Lord showed incomparable boldness. Poor Regretless could never imagine that from beginning to end, he played in the Dharma Lord and Celestial Slaughter's hand. But as the siblings' eyes widened at the realization, the time paradoxes ended, with the past and future uniting in the present, uniting in Tauroth. No, calling him Tauroth was inaccurate. The entity standing before them all was the amalgam of 3. 3 in 1, 1 with 3. The Supreme Conqueror. Still, as he gazed at the Jade Crown, there were many points Conrad couldn't understand. Not bad, my Crown Prince. Not bad at all. If Regretless had half your wit, perhaps this day couldn't have seen fruition. Just perhaps. Tauroth began in a deadening voice that carried power and strength few on the scene could gauge. Indeed, the Dharma Lord is the one that set the plan in motion, for the simple reason that the Dharma Lord is the Supreme Conqueror Sutra, the original manual, that is. Tauroth explained, causing the knowledgeable's eyes to widen in disbelief. To say nothing of the rest, even Conrad had not seen that one coming. When only nothingness covered the world. When nothingness was the omniverse, the Nirvana dust crown appeared as the first supreme artifact. However, when infiniteness reared its head, emerging to replace nothingness, in the clash that ensued, a steel rose from nothingness, bringing alongside it the first cultivation method of the omniverse, the first ancient secret, the Supreme Conqueror Sutra. As infiniteness triumphed, the steel developed sentience and morphed to become the Dharma Lord. He took the Nirvana dust crown and hid in the firmament which appeared alongside infiniteness. From infiniteness, the primal laws emerged, opening the road for all the rest. The laws shaped the omniverse as you know it, making it a ground for life. Alongside it, the firmament too changed, and in the coming epochs, guided by the Dharma Lord, 8 individuals rose to become supreme, thereby joining him in the firmament. But how could such a life satisfy him? He existed with a singular purpose, to bring back the eternal reign of nothingness. For that, he used the Nirvana dust crown to incarnate himself in the future, creating the former Empyrean Dragon Emperor's second son, Radiant Dragon. As Tauratha's words reached that point, Conrad's eyes narrowed. Radiant Dragon and the Dharma Lord could never meet, but they needed not. Radiant Dragon not only possessed the Dharma Lord's knowledge and memories, but he could also channel the Nirvana dust crown to incarnate himself in the future, thereby creating Tauroth. Though they never met, the two coordinated to set into motion the creation of the Supreme Conqueror. At that point, Cloud could no longer restrain himself, and he chimed in. You mean to say that everything that happened until now, from Regretless' fall to his rise, from the Omniverse conquest and the destruction of the 8 Supremes, was always part of your plan? He snarled. However, before that cry of outrage, Tauroth merely nodded. Naturally, and you've all played your roles to perfection. Chapter 552, The Supreme Conqueror Part 2. In the past, Radiant Dragon didn't doubt that Regretless would rise to defeat him. If he couldn't, the situation would have been troublesome, based on Radiant Dragon's past strength, to say nothing of eternal dominion. Even the firmament's 8 Supremes were frustrating enough challenges. We needed a flawless template, the foundation that would allow us to return with tremendous strength and unrivaled potential. As the #1 talent of all times, Regretless was the best option. So we helped him. We groomed his hatred, his thirst for vengeance, helped him thrive on it and rise to become a peerless powerhouse. And indeed, he didn't disappoint. The creation of that Omniarch bloodline was proof of our success. Even without becoming supreme, he already was more than a match for the Firmament's Supremes, worthy of the title of #1 prodigy of all eras. Tauroth sighed in reminiscence, causing Cloud's rage to sear his heart. Some words were difficult to accept, but regardless of how much they gashed, accepting them was the only option. Of course, that wasn't enough. We needed to deceive you into thinking that Radiant Dragon's return was on a timeline, that the Conqueror's will would reincarnate him at random within his birth or death place. But though the return place was indeed either heaven or hell, the time was always ours to choose. More accurately, it was the Dharma Lord's. Having already hypothesized that part, Conrad wasn't too surprised. As for the remaining question, he could now form answers. But as if anticipating them, Tauroth pursued. With Regretless as the foundation, returning with supreme-level strength was inevitable. Following our merge, becoming a high supreme was natural. But that wasn't enough, for at the end of the day, Regretless was too strong. With his potential and means, though we didn't doubt he would never become almighty, his strength would keep rising. And it did. To prepare for that, we needed 2 things: to groom a peerless army and deflect Regretless attention with deceit and decoys, making you believe that Radiant Dragon would be reborn among the 3 realms' denizens? Deceit. As for the decoy, Dragon Warden served that role. Using a primordial seed, Radiant Dragon sent him into reincarnation, expecting that the day he formed a true bridge and revealed his identity, Regretless attention and wrath would shift onto him. And with the Nirvana dust crown, the Dharma Lord saved all the rest. All the dead, from the 6 realms to the firmament, he saved them all, not only maintaining a sliver of their existence in the crown, but taking full control of them. When their existence returned to completion, the Dharma Lord spread strands across the Omniverse, using the powers of Nirvana and Samsara to make them grow through all reincarnations until they reached the peak. The time of their return is the time of our rebirth, and now they are ready. We are ready. Tauroth proclaimed and raised his right hand, causing tens of thousands of light rays to surge from the Nirvana dust crown and coalesce in the sky. From the rays, tens of thousands of various figures emerged, startling the world with a mind-boggling eruption of might. Among them, the primordial remnants such as Cloud, Moon, and Night recognized faces that filled them with awe. 16, in particular, kept their eyes wide open. The four Dragon Kings, Cloud whispered as his gaze swept 3 elderly men and 1 riveting woman, 2 of them with golden hair, while the remaining 2s were silver. In the past, the cultivation of those 4 was just at the over-god level. But now, it was already at the peak of the primordial god rank. And that was cultivation alone. The 3 tribulation envoys, the 3 Tao paragons, the 9 nether monarchs, the 8 supremes. Moon said in succession, gasping at the sight of those past powerhouses, none of which appeared weaker than the peak of the primordial god rank. Conrad, however, ignored them all to stare at the 2 now standing beside Talroth. But if Malcolm becoming the 3rd Empyrean Dragon Prince, Dragon Dark, brought him mild surprise, the silver-haired woman at Talroth's right, Asmodeus' new form, filled him with an inexplicable wave of emotions. Even Imperial Mother stands in the midst. Where then is highest dragon? Conrad whispered, for indeed, that woman, Asmodeus' past self, was none other than Dragon Warden's mother, the Empyrean Dragon Empress, Bright Dragon Star. On the scene, 100,000 primordial gods, the majority from the Empyrean Dragon race, gathered around Talroth, around their lord, forming the strongest army of all times. And in tandem, all dropped on their knees. Greetings, Your Majesty. The synchronized hail thundered in the sky, shocking trillions to the core of their soul. In the past, Radiant Dragon took the reign name of Celestial Slaughter to announce his will to bend the world in a bloodstorm. In this age, it is still valid. Regardless of what my birth name may be, I am the Supreme Conqueror, Celestial Slaughter. And if not by right of birth, then through blood and steel, the world shall be mine. Celestial Slaughter bellowed, letting his high supreme will explode in every word as he stared into Conrad's icy blue hues. Son, when you achieved the impossible and formed that firmament bridge, you outpaced all my expectations. Only you could somehow deviate from my plans. For that, I praise you. However, there can only be one eternal ruler. That crown, I claim. Surrender to me and join the ranks of my army. Again in this life, raise your sword in my name. Become my number 1 general, and I promise that you shall be below 1 but above the rest. In the future, when I conquer the firmament, the omniverse is yours. Celestial Slaughter offered, making Conrad arch an eyebrow. Oh, old man, apologies, but your perfect script went wrong when you chose to include me in the midst. In this world, there is nothing you can offer me that I can't claim by myself. The world can indeed only have one sovereign, and I have no position to offer you. Conrad replied and raised the god executing immortal sword. Right now, there was a serious lack of information regarding Celestial Slaughter's abilities. Although Conrad reached high supreme level, possessed a firmament bloodline and all transcendence, he dared not underestimate him. After all, his cultivation was still at the late stage of the anti-god realm. Celestial Slaughter, however, seemed to have reached the summit of a perfect true bridge. Better, his bloodline strength contained a strange signature even Conrad couldn't fully appraise. As if he'd already anticipated the reply, Celestial Slaughter nodded in approval. Very well, Conrad. Then let the battle for the Omniverse begin. Celestial Slaughter exclaimed and stretched out his hands, releasing an irresistible suction force that trapped both Night and Cloud, pulling them toward him. Right before Celestial Slaughter, a gray vortex appeared, ready to consume the 2 in their entirety. In the split of a second, Conrad realized Celestial Slaughter now possessed the power to devour his foes and absorb their strength. But though how much he could absorb was uncertain, Conrad would typically never allow such a thing to occur. But this time, he made no move. And as Cloud and Night faced the danger of extermination, within the firmament, Regretless trembled. Within the world of his demons, still enjoying his chess time with highest dragon, Regretless was about to move a knight when his body shook. Instantly, his face twisted into an expression of incomparable fury. "Imperial uncle, apologies, but I have people to kill," Regretless stated, and the world of his demons shattered. Back into the real world, Regretless opened his eyes wide, and they now rippled with a force that even surpassed what he possessed before the curse. Without a word, he stood up and stepped forward, vanishing to reappear in Hell's sky. Still without a word, without paying heed to the scene or what it implied, Regretless curved his right hand into a knife shape and chopped downward. A formless force exploded, shattering Celestial Slaughter's suction force and freeing Night and Cloud from his grip. Only now did Regretless sweep the scene, and though at first what he saw made his eyes widen, a second afterward, his lips curved into. "And here I was wondering who was so bold as to threaten my brother's lives. Celestial Slaughter, it's just you?" Regretless scoffed with an arrogance that made all wonder where his confidence hailed from. But when he stretched out his hands, releasing the most dreadful concentration of might they'd ever seen, none no longer wondered where his conceit stemmed from. As the Omniarch's might unfurled, all realms quaked, and the very fabric of the Omniverse shivered. "You're a High Supreme now? So what? You have 100,000 primordials? Hundreds of Supremes? So what? Before my sovereign might, all must collapse, and on your corpse I shall remind the world why only I bear the name of Omniarch." Regretless bellowed, and the battle for the Omniverse officially began. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.